When we think about ancient Greece and Rome, we usually picture them as two separate worlds, the noble Greeks with their philosophy and democracy, and the mighty Romans with their legions and empire. But what really happened when these two civilizations collided wasn't a simple story of conquest and defeat. It was something far more complex, far more surprising, and far more human than most people realize. The relationship between Greece and Rome became one of the most fascinating cultural exchanges in history, where the conquered became the teachers and the conquerors became the students. Neither civilization emerged unchanged from this meeting, and the world we live in today still carries the mark of their extraordinary partnership. If you like these videos, I would appreciate if you clicked like or subscribed, as it's important for the channel, and it helps others find it too, just like you did. Thank you. Now, let's get started. Picture, if you will, the moment when two worlds were about to collide, not with the crash of thunder, but with the slow, inevitable pull of gravity. Rome was rising in the west, methodical and relentless. Greece was ancient in the east, weary but still proud of its golden memories. It's the year 231 BC, and if you had been wandering the stone streets of Athens that morning, you might have noticed how different things felt. The air carried the scent of baking bread, mixed with less pleasant city odors. Your sandals would have slapped against warm stones as you made your way to the Agora, that bustling heart of Athenian life. Athens wasn't what it used to be, you see. The elders still told stories about the golden days, when Socrates walked these very streets, asking his famous questions. When Plato founded his academy just outside the city walls. When Aristotle tutored young Alexander, who would one day conquer the known world. Those were the days when the Parthenon gleamed white and new, not weathered by centuries of Mediterranean sun and rain. But by 231 BC, Athens was just another Greek city caught in the endless political games between larger powers. To the north, Macedonia flexed its muscles under King Antigonus. To the east, the vast Seleucid Empire stretched deep into Asia. To the south, Ptolemaic Egypt controlled islands and coastal territories with its powerful fleets, and far to the west, across the Adriatic Sea, something new was stirring. Rome, that practical city of soldiers and engineers, was beginning to cast its shadow eastward. Most Greeks didn't pay much attention to Rome back then. After all, what could these Western barbarians want with the sophisticated culture of Greece? They were known for their roads and their legions, but surely they lacked the refined philosophy and art that made Greek civilization so special. If you had been a craftsman in Athens that morning, working bronze into elegant shapes for wealthy clients, you might have heard raised voices in the street. Merchants often brought news from distant lands, and on this particular day, the news was troubling. Pirates from Illyria, that wild region across the Adriatic from Italy, had been growing bolder. Under their ambitious Queen Taita, they were raiding merchant ships with increasing frequency. Among those ships were vessels belonging to Italian traders, and Romans didn't take kindly to threats against their commercial interests. In the Roman Senate, debates were heating up. The Republic was still catching its breath after the exhausting First Punic War against Carthage, but many senators were pushing for action against these Illyrian pirates. Rome had learned something important during its rise to power in Italy. Problems ignored have a way of growing into bigger problems. The Romans sent an embassy to Queen Tuta, demanding she stop the piracy. The story goes that when the Roman ambassadors explained how things worked among civilized nations, the queen responded with typical Illyrian directness. She told them that piracy was a traditional way of life for her people, and she had no intention of interfering with private enterprise. One of the Roman ambassadors, perhaps forgetting diplomatic protocol, suggested that Rome might teach the Illyrians some better customs. Queen Taita's response was swift and deadly. She had the ambassador killed, a decision that would echo through history. You see, Rome had a particular talent for turning insult into opportunities. The murder of their ambassador gave them exactly the justification they needed to intervene across the Adriatic Sea. But this intervention would do more than just deal with some troublesome pirates. The Roman legions that crossed into Illyria in 229 BC were unlike anything the Eastern Mediterranean had seen before. They moved with mechanical precision, building camps each night according to strict regulations. They constructed roads as they advanced, creating permanent infrastructure that would outlast their immediate military needs. Greek observers, watching from across the narrow sea, were both impressed and unsettled. These Romans fought differently than Greeks. Where Greek warfare had become a kind of elaborate dance between professional armies, Roman warfare was grimly practical. They didn't seek glory in single combat or elegant tactical maneuvers. They sought victory, complete and permanent. The First Illyrian War, as historians would later call it, was over almost before it began. Queen Tata found herself facing an enemy she couldn't intimidate or bribe. Roman diplomacy was backed by Roman steel, and Roman steel was wielded by soldiers who viewed warfare as a job to be completed efficiently. Within 2 years, Illyria was pacified. Queen Teitua was confined to a small territory around her capital and forbidden from sailing south with more than 2 ships at a time. Rome had established a permanent presence on the eastern shore of the Adriatic Sea, but something else happened during this brief war, something that would reshape the ancient world. For the first time, Romans and Greeks encountered each other not as distant neighbors, but as allies and enemies in the same conflicts. Greek cities that had been threatened by Illyrian pirates welcomed Roman protection. Greek merchants marveled at Roman organization and efficiency. And the Romans, practical as always, began to realize just how much wealth and culture existed in the Greek world. They had come east to solve a piracy problem, but they discovered something far more valuable than safe shipping lanes. They discovered a civilization that could teach them things their own culture had never developed. The irony wasn't lost on thoughtful observers in both cultures. Rome had the power to protect Greek cities, but those cities possessed knowledge and artistic traditions that Romans could barely comprehend. It was like watching a strong, practical farmer encounter a brilliant but fragile philosopher. Each had something the other needed, but neither was quite sure how to bridge the gap between their different worlds. This encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would eventually bring Roman legions marching through every major Greek city. But that's a story for another night, when we can explore how the most powerful military machine in the world learned to appreciate poetry, philosophy, and the subtle art of turning marble into dreams of gods and heroes. Time moved forward as it always does, carrying the people of Athens through their familiar rhythms. The scorching heat of summer slowly melted away, replaced by autumn's gentler embrace. Workers continued their daily labors. Citizens made their regular visits to the public baths for cleansing and conversation, and evenings found friends gathered in cozy taverns, sharing stories over cups of wine. But then, something extraordinary happened. News traveled across the Mediterranean like wildfire, the kind of news that makes people stop their conversations mid-sentence. A Roman diplomat had been murdered in the distant kingdom of Illyria, and whispers suggested that Queen Tata herself might have ordered the killing. This alone would have been shocking enough. But what followed left even the worldly Athenians speechless. Rome, that ambitious city far to the west, had done something almost unthinkable. They had declared war on Illyria and assembled a military force so massive it seemed to defy belief. 22,000 soldiers, along with 200 ships, were crossing the Adriatic Sea in what would become known as one of history's most audacious military expeditions. The scale of this undertaking was breathtaking. Never before had Rome projected such power so far from its homeland. The logistics alone were staggering. Imagine organizing food, weapons, and supplies for that many men, then transporting everything across treacherous waters to fight in unfamiliar lands. In the taverns of Athens, debates erupted with the passion that only comes from discussing distant wars. The merchants, those practical men who understood trade routes and regional politics, scoffed at Roman ambitions. They argued that Rome knew nothing about eastern waters, nothing about the complexities of Illyrian warfare. The locals would surely crush these Western invaders who dared venture so far from home. But the older men, those who had seen battles and understood the weight of military experience, weren't so certain. They spoke in hushed tones about Roman discipline, about the legendary efficiency of the legions that had somehow managed to defeat the mighty Carthaginians. These weren't just any soldiers, they reminded their companions. These were the same warriors who had survived decades of brutal warfare. The younger men countered with geography and local knowledge. This wasn't North Africa or Italy, they insisted. These eastern lands had their own rhythms, their own secrets. Surely the Romans would stumble in territories they didn't understand, among people whose customs and fighting styles were completely foreign to them. For ordinary citizens, watching these events unfold felt like observing a distant thunderstorm. Politics had always been a dangerous game, best left to those wealthy enough and connected enough to survive its consequences. Most people preferred to focus on their daily bread, their family concerns, their immediate community. Yet something about this Roman expedition felt different, more significant than the usual conflicts between distant kingdoms. There was an unsettling quality to Rome's boldness, a suggestion that the world might be changing in ways that would eventually touch everyone, even peaceful Athenians who wanted nothing to do with warfare and conquest. The unease proved prophetic. Within just 1 year, news arrived that would reshape how everyone thought about Roman power. The campaign had been a complete triumph, so swift and decisive that it seemed almost miraculous. Queen Tota, who had seemed so formidable, had been forced to accept terms so humiliating they took everyone's breath away. The Illyrian kingdom lost vast territories, ancient lands that had been theirs for generations. Worse still, they agreed to pay regular tribute to Rome, essentially acknowledging themselves as a subordinate power. In one brilliant campaign, the Romans had established themselves as a major force in the eastern Mediterranean, much closer to Greece than anyone had imagined possible. This victory marked something profound in the ancient world. Rome had announced itself not just as a regional Italian power, but as a force capable of projecting strength across seas and continents. The implications were staggering, and suddenly, the comfortable distance that had always protected Greece began to feel much smaller. For the first time in generations, thoughtful Greeks began to wonder if they should be paying more attention to this rising power in the West. The Romans had proven they could move quickly, strike decisively, and establish lasting control over distant territories. What other ambitions might they harbor? And how long before those ambitions turned toward the ancient cities of Greece itself? Time has a way of creeping up on all of us, doesn't it? The years pile on like dust on forgotten furniture, and suddenly you notice the changes. Your body starts speaking to you in new languages, the language of creaking bones, the whispered complaints of muscles that used to work without question. There's something deeply human about watching yourself age, watching the world shift around you like sand through an hourglass. In those days when Philip V took the throne of Macedon, people experienced this same universal rhythm of aging, the same quiet recognition that their bodies were marking time. Antigonus had died, as all kings do, and power passed to younger hands, as it always does. The cycle continued, indifferent to individual hopes and fears. But while individuals grew older and felt their backs protest after long days, the world itself was stirring with anticipation. Whispers traveled faster than armies in those times, carrying news of brewing conflicts across the Mediterranean. People gathered in marketplaces and taverns, sharing rumors like precious coins, each story growing a little larger, a little more dramatic with each telling. The year 218 BC arrived with all the weight of destiny, though nobody at the time could have known it. This was when whispers became reality, when distant threats suddenly materialized into something tangible and terrifying. Hannibal, whose name would echo through history like thunder, made his famous decision to cross the Alps. Picture this for a moment, the sheer audacity of it. Here was a man who looked at one of nature's greatest barriers and decided it was merely an inconvenience. The Alps, those towering peaks that had kept civilizations apart for centuries, became just another obstacle to overcome. And he brought elephants, those magnificent creatures of war, up through mountain passes, where the air grew thin and the cold bit like knives. The invasion of Italy sent shockwaves across the ancient world. Greece, that collection of city-states always watching each other with suspicious eyes, suddenly found itself united in fascination. Here was drama unfolding on a scale that dwarfed their local squabbles and petty rivalries. Athens, in particular, buzzed with excitement over each piece of news. Not because they harbored any special love for Carthage, mind you, but because there's something deeply satisfying about watching a bully get challenged. Rome had grown powerful, perhaps too powerful, and power without humility tends to breed resentment among those who remember their own glory days. The Battle of Lake Trasimene became one of those moments that people remember exactly where they were when they heard the news. 15,000 Romans dead, they said, passing the numbers around like sacred texts. The very idea that Rome could be brought low, that this seemingly unstoppable force could stumble, filled taverns with animated conversations and wild speculations. But in every crowd, there's usually someone whose wisdom cut through the excitement like a blade through silk. Often it's the old soldier, the one who's seen enough battles to know that victory and defeat are just different faces of the same cruel coin. His question hung in the air, like smoke from a dying fire. What happens if Rome actually falls? It's a profound question, really. One that reveals how complex power truly is. We often focus so much on wanting the powerful to fall that we forget to ask who will rise in their place. The old soldier understood something that the celebrating crowds didn't, that power abhors a vacuum, and whatever fills that void might not be any kinder than what came before. Meanwhile, far from the tavern celebrations and worried conversations, King Philip V was conducting his own calculations. He saw opportunity where others saw chaos, chance where others saw destruction. The alliance he would forge with Hannibal seemed logical at the time, a way to expand Macedonian influence while Rome was distracted and vulnerable. But history has a way of punishing those who mistake temporary weakness for permanent defeat. Philip's decision would eventually bring Roman legions marching across Greek soil, turning his moment of opportunity into a long nightmare of occupation and submission. The war itself became a strange, distant drama that played out over years. News arrived in fragments, contradictory reports that painted confusing pictures of victory and defeat. Hannibal remained unbeaten on the battlefield, his tactical genius evident in victory after victory. Yet somehow Rome endured, somehow found the strength to continue fighting. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of Roman character, this ability to absorb tremendous punishment and keep moving forward. Other civilizations might have sought peace after such devastating losses, but Rome had developed a culture that viewed setbacks as temporary inconveniences rather than permanent defeats. As the war dragged on, people's attention naturally began to drift back to their immediate concerns. Grand historical events, no matter how momentous, eventually become background noise when daily survival demands attention. The price of bread matters more than distant battles when your stomach is empty. The pain in your joints speaks louder than news of foreign victories when every step becomes an effort. There's something deeply melancholy about aging alone, about watching your body slowly betray you without someone to share the burden. Marriage in those times wasn't just about love or companionship, it was about survival, about having someone to care for you when you could no longer care for yourself. But marriage required resources, stability, things that remained out of reach for many. Loneliness has its own weight, different from physical pain, but just as real, just as persistent. It settles on your shoulders like a heavy cloak, reminding you of its presence with every quiet evening, every meal eaten in solitude, every small triumph or disappointment that has no one to witness it. The rising cost of food added another layer of worry to daily existence. Economic pressures, then as now, had a way of making everything else seem less important. When you're calculating whether you can afford both bread and oil, the fate of distant empires becomes an abstracting concern, interesting but not immediate. Picture yourself standing in an ancient marketplace. The familiar bustle of vendors and buyers, suddenly interrupted by something extraordinary. A messenger arrives, dust-covered and breathless, carrying news that will change everything. Word spreads like wildfire through the crowd. Rome has done the impossible. They've defeated the great Carthaginian general Hannibal, not through some miraculous victory, but through something far more clever. You see, while Hannibal was winning battle after battle in Italy, the Romans were playing a completely different game. Instead of desperately trying to stop him, they took the war directly to his homeland. It's the kind of strategic thinking that catches everyone off guard. Hannibal, the master tactician, who had terrified Rome for years, suddenly found himself recalled home to defend Carthage itself. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight harder, but to change where you're fighting entirely. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The Greeks had been watching this whole drama unfold, and many had chosen sides. King Philip of Macedon, thinking Rome was finished, had allied himself with Carthage. It seemed like a smart bet at the time. Rome was struggling, Hannibal appeared unstoppable, and backing the winning side is always tempting. Except, of course, Rome didn't collapse, and Romans, as it turns out, have remarkably long memories. The messenger's words carry an ominous weight. Rome hasn't forgotten who stood against them. Even as they're celebrating victory over Carthage, they're already looking eastward. Suddenly, what seemed like distant conflicts between faraway powers becomes something much more personal, much more immediate. What follows is fascinating in its restraint. The First Macedonian War, as historians would later call it, barely deserves the name. Rome, still focused on finishing off Carthage completely, settles for a peace treaty that changes almost nothing. It's the kind of agreement that everyone knows is temporary, a polite pause before the real reckoning begins. Sure enough, just 3 years after crushing Carthage at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Rome turns its full attention to the east. They don't even need to manufacture an excuse. Complaints about Macedonian aggression from Greek cities provide all the justification they need. It's remarkable how often history provides convenient pretexts for those patient enough to wait for them. The Second Macedonian War begins with all the weight and certainty that the first one lacked. 20,000 Roman legionaries land at Apollonia under Consul Galba. It's not a tentative probe or a diplomatic gesture, it's the full force of Roman military might, now seasoned by years of fighting Carthage and ready for a new challenge. But here's the tragic irony that makes this story so compelling. The Greeks, faced with this Roman invasion, do exactly what they've always done: they fracture. The Aetolian League sides with Rome against Philip. Pergamon and Rhodes contribute ships to the Roman cause. Instead of uniting against the outside threat, they see it as an opportunity to settle old scores with each other. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history, this tendency for people to invite outside powers into their disputes. Philip of Macedon, Alexander's father, had used exactly this Greek habit to gain control over the city-states a century and a half earlier. He positioned himself as the helpful ally to various Greek factions, until suddenly he wasn't an ally anymore. He was the ruler. Now the same dynamic was playing out again, except this time the outside power was Rome. There's something almost inevitable about how these events unfold, like watching a familiar story retold with different actors. The marketplace conversations, the worried whispers, the gradual realization that the world is changing faster than anyone anticipated. History has this way of creeping up on ordinary people, transforming their daily lives through events that seem to happen somewhere else to someone else, until suddenly they don't. The transformation of Rome from a regional Italian power to the dominant force in the Mediterranean didn't happen overnight. It was built through exactly these kinds of patient, strategic decisions. They learned to think beyond the immediate battle, to consider not just how to win, but what winning would mean for the future. While their enemies focused on tactical brilliance, Rome mastered the art of strategic patience. History has this peculiar way of folding in on itself, like pages in an old book that stick together. The same stories seem to play out again and again, just with different actors taking the stage. In the Eastern Mediterranean, around 2 centuries before Christ was born, the world was watching Rome step into a role that felt oddly familiar. Athens, that shining beacon of democracy and culture, found itself in an uncomfortable position. This was the city that had once stood up to the mighty Persian Empire, the place where philosophy was born and where the greatest minds of the ancient world had gathered to debate and dream. But now, Athens was little more than a spectator in its own neighborhood. The Athenians had thrown their support behind Rome, not out of love, but out of practicality. When you're caught between two giants, you choose the one that seems less likely to crush you completely. Macedon had been the local bully for generations, and now Rome offered what looked like a better alternative. Into this tense situation stepped a Roman consul named Titus Quinctius Flamininus. Unlike many of his fellow Romans, this man understood the Greeks. He spoke their language fluently, knew their customs, and perhaps most importantly, he knew exactly what they wanted to hear. Flamininus proclaimed that Rome had not come as a conqueror, but as a liberator, a friend who would free the Greek cities from Macedonian oppression. Many Greeks believed these words, desperately wanting them to be true, but there were those who had lived long enough to know that when someone wages war claiming it's for your benefit, you should probably count your silver twice. The moment that changed everything came in 197 BC, at a place called Synkinos Cephalai in northern Greece. The name means dog's heads in Greek, referring to the shape of the hills where the battle was fought. Here, for the first time, Roman legions faced the famous Macedonian phalanx in a proper, open battle. The phalanx was an awesome sight to behold. Imagine a wall of bronze shields and long spears, men packed so tightly together they moved as one organism. This formation had been the master of ancient battlefields for over a century. It was the weapon that had carried Alexander the Great across the known world, toppling the Persian Empire and creating the largest empire the world had ever seen. But at Cynoscephalae, something went wrong. The ground was uneven, full of small hills and valleys. As the phalanx advanced, gaps began to open in the formation. The Romans, with their shorter swords and more flexible tactics, poured into these openings like water through cracks in a dam. News of the battle spread quickly through the Greek world. A man in the Athenian marketplace, claiming his brother had fought in the battle, described the carnage to anyone who would listen. 8,000 Macedonians dead, he said. 5,000 more captured. King Philip himself had barely escaped with his life. For those who understood what this meant, the world had just shifted on its axis. The phalanx, that seemingly invincible formation, had been broken by Roman discipline and adaptability. It was as if someone had proven that the sun could rise in the west. The terms Rome, imposed on the defeated Philip, were crushing. He had to withdraw from all Greek territories, reduce his navy to almost nothing, and pay an enormous sum of money to Rome. But perhaps most significantly, he had to become Rome's ally, which in practical terms meant he became Rome's servant. The following year, at the Isthmian Games near Corinth, Flamininus made a dramatic announcement that would echo through Greek history. Standing before thousands of gathered Greeks, he declared that Rome was granting freedom to all the major Greek peoples, no garrisons, no tribute, complete independence under their own laws. The reaction was extraordinary. The crowd erupted in such thunderous celebration that witnesses claimed birds flying overhead were stunned by the noise and fell to the ground. Greece was free, at last, no longer under the boot of Macedon. But freedom is a complicated thing, especially when it comes as a gift from a more powerful neighbor. Those with wisdom born of experience understood that freedom granted could just as easily be freedom taken away. Rome might call itself a liberator, but it had not sent its armies across the Mediterranean out of pure generosity. This suspicion proved justified much sooner than even the skeptics expected. Just 5 years after Cynoscephalae, another crisis erupted. Antiochus III, ruler of the vast Seleucid Empire that stretched from Syria to the borders of India, decided to expand his dominion into Europe. Rome, now firmly established as the guardian of Greek freedom, once again mobilized its legions. The Aetolian League, a confederation of Greek cities that had previously supported Rome against Philip, suddenly switched sides. They had finally realized what many others were beginning to understand, that they had simply traded one master for another. It was too late for second thoughts. At Thermopylae, that legendary narrow pass where 300 Spartans had once made their heroic stand against the Persian hordes, the Romans crushed Antiochus and his army. The symbolism was impossible to ignore, Rome fighting at the same place where Greeks had once defended their homeland against Eastern invaders. But the Romans were not content to simply drive Antiochus out of Europe. They followed him across the Aegean Sea into Asia Minor, the land we now call Turkey. At Magnesia, in 190 BC, they defeated him again, even more decisively. The peace terms were even harsher than those imposed on Philip. Antiochus had to abandon all his territories in Asia Minor and pay an indemnity that would cripple his empire's finances for decades. As for the Aetolians, Rome made them an example that would not be forgotten. Their league was stripped of territory and independence, reduced to nothing more than a Roman puppet state. The message to the rest of the Greek world was crystal clear. Rome's friendship came with conditions, and those conditions were not negotiable. The age of Greek independence was drawing to a close, even as Rome continued to speak of liberation and freedom. Sometimes the most profound changes come wrapped in the language of preservation, and the most complete conquests are achieved by those who claim they never intended to conquer at all. Picture an elderly craftsman in ancient Athens, his once steady hands now trembling with age. The hammer that shaped bronze for decades now rests heavy in his apprentice's grip. His world has grown smaller, confined to the familiar walls of his workshop, where metal still glows red-hot in the forge. Outside these walls, empires shift like shadows, and freedom becomes just another word politicians use. The old man watches Rome's curious form of liberation unfold across Greece. They declared the Greeks free, yes, but their legions remained scattered across strategic positions like chess pieces on a board. Roman advisors whisper in the ears of Greek leaders, their suggestions carrying the weight of unspoken threats. Slowly, quietly, Roman merchants begin purchasing Greek businesses. Roman investors funding Greek ventures, its conquest wearing the mask of friendship, more complete than any battlefield victory could ever be. When you control a nation's purse strings, you control its heart. In the north, Macedonia stirs under new leadership. Perseus takes the throne after his father Philip's death in 179 BC, and unlike his predecessor, this young king refuses to bow gracefully to Rome's expectations. He rebuilds his armies, forges new alliances, reaches out to northern tribes in Thrace. The chess pieces begin moving again. Rome's senators remember too well the elephants crossing the Alps, Hannibal's army camping outside their gates. They will not allow another enemy to gather strength on the horizon. Diplomatic letters fly back and forth, each more accusatory than the last, until words give way to swords in 171 BC. The Third Macedonian War begins with surprising hope for Perseus. His cavalry charges succeed where his fathers failed, winning battles that make Roman commanders nervous. For a brief shining moment, it seems possible that Macedonia might reclaim its ancient glory, that Alexander's homeland might rise again, but Rome possesses something more dangerous than brilliant tactics, more valuable than brave soldiers. Rome never gives up. They replace failed commanders with fresh ones, send new legions to replace the defeated ones, pour gold into their war machine until victory becomes inevitable. At Pidenae in 168 BC, the famous Macedonian phalanx meets Roman steel for the last time. Those long spears that once conquered Persia, that carried Alexander to India's borders, splinter and break against Roman shields. Perseus flees the battlefield, but capture follows quickly. He will spend his remaining years in an Italian prison, watching foreign sunsets through iron bars. Macedonia, the kingdom that gave birth to Alexander, that stretched from Egypt to Afghanistan, simply ceases to exist. The Romans carve it into 4 separate republics, each forbidden from trading or communicating with the others. The The royal minds that funded centuries of warfare fall silent. A people who once ruled half the world find themselves paying tribute to their conquerors. The punishment spreads beyond Macedonia's borders like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. Any Greek city suspected of supporting Perseus faces Rome's terrible arithmetic. 70 towns in Epirus vanish from existence. 150,000 people wake up as free citizens and sleep as slaves. The message rings clear across every Greek marketplace, every temple, every home. Back in Athens, our craftsman lies in his bed, his body finally surrendering to time's patient siege. His former apprentice, now a master craftsman himself, brings news along with bread and wine. The old man's voice barely rises above the whisper of wind through shutters as he asks the question, haunting every Greek heart. What becomes of us, now? His apprentice speaks of endurance, of survival through adaptation. Roman children already study in Athenian schools, learning philosophy from Greek teachers. Roman architects copy Greek columns. Roman sculptors imitate Greek statues. Perhaps, he suggests, conquest works both ways. Perhaps the conquered can reshape their conquerors. There. It's a comforting thought, this idea of cultural victory outlasting political defeat. History will indeed prove him partially right. Roman poets will write in Greek meters. Roman gods will wear Greek faces. Roman emperors will dream of Athenian democracy. But as the old craftsman closes his eyes, another truth settles in his heart. Freedom once lost takes centuries to return. The Greece he knew, the Greece that chose its own path, argued its own politics, fought its own battles, has passed into memory. What emerges from Roman rule will be something different, neither fully Greek nor Roman, shaped by compromise and accommodation. The workshop grows quiet, except for the gentle hiss of cooling metal. Outside, Athens continues its daily rhythms under foreign oversight, its people learning the complex dance of survival under occupation. The hammer will ring again. Tomorrow, bronze will take new shapes, life will continue. But the song it sings will be forever changed, carrying new melodies imposed by distant masters who prefer order to independence, stability to the beautiful, chaotic freedom that once defined the Greek spirit. The year 146 BC would bring two momentous endings to the ancient world. While Rome's armies prepared their final assault on Carthage, far across the Mediterranean, another great civilization was breathing its last. The Achaean League, that last desperate alliance of Greek cities, was gathering what remained of their strength for one final stand against Roman rule. Imagine the weight of that moment when an entire world realizes its time has come to an end. The Greeks had fought, negotiated, and maneuvered for decades, trying to preserve some fragment of their independence. But Rome's appetite for control was insatiable, and patience was no longer a virtue the Romans cared to practice. Corinth stood as the jewel of this resistance, that magnificent trading city perched on its narrow strip of land between two seas. For centuries, merchants had dragged their ships across this isthmus, connecting the waters of east and west. The city had grown wealthy on this commerce. Its temples gleaming with marble, its harbors crowded with vessels from every corner of the known world. When the Roman consul Lucius Mummius arrived with his legions, the outcome was never really in doubt. The Achaean army met them in battle, but courage alone couldn't overcome Roman military precision. The defeat was swift, complete, and merciless. What followed was something that shocked even Rome's allies, a destruction so thorough it would echo through history as a warning. Mummius didn't simply conquer Corinth, he erased it. Every building was torn down, stone by stone. The city's famous artworks, those masterpieces that had adorned temples and public spaces for generations, were carefully catalogued and shipped to Rome. The people, those who survived the battle, found themselves marched to slave markets across the Mediterranean. For nearly a century afterward, the site lay empty. Grass grew through broken foundations, and wild animals made their homes where merchants once haggled over precious goods. It was a ghost story written in stone. And silence, a reminder of what happened when you pushed Rome too far. But here's something fascinating about empires. They're never quite finished with the places they destroy. Julius Caesar, that master of political theatre, chose this very spot to make a statement about Roman power and mercy. In 44 BC, he founded a new colony on the ruins of Old Corinth, filling it with Roman settlers and Greek merchants, eager for a fresh start. The new city rose from the ashes, like something from myth, but it was unmistakably Roman in character. The Forum followed Roman architectural principles. The laws were Roman laws. The language of government was Latin. Yet underneath this Roman surface, Greek culture persisted in countless small ways. The way people prepared their food, the stories they told their children, the gods they whispered to in private moments. Life in this reborn Corinth meant navigating between worlds. A young person growing up there might have a Greek father and an Italian mother, speaking both languages with equal fluency. Their breakfast might be Greek-style bread with honey, but eaten while discussing Roman politics. Their clothes followed Roman fashion, but with subtle nods to Greek tradition. The morning routine of such a person tells us so much about how conquest actually works in daily life. You wake on a Roman-style sleeping couch, but the olive oil for your lamp comes from Greek groves that have been pressing olives for 1,000 years. You dress in a tunic, cut according to the latest Roman fashion, but the wool was spun by Greek women, using techniques passed down through generations. Work, for the educated class, often meant serving as a bridge between conqueror and conquered. Translation wasn't just about changing Greek words into Latin. It was about helping two very different ways of seeing the world understand each other. The Roman administrator needed to know not just what the Greek merchant was saying, but what he really meant, what cultural assumptions lay behind his words. The streets themselves told stories of transformation. Roman architectural styles dominated the important buildings, those symbols of power and authority that needed to look unmistakably imperial. But walk down a side street, peer into a workshop or a small temple, and you'd see Greek proportions, Greek decorative elements, Greek ways of organizing space that went deeper than politics. News traveled slowly in this ancient world, but when it arrived, it could reshape everything overnight. A merchant ship pulling into harbor might carry word that would change the course of history. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March, 44 BC, was exactly that kind of world-shattering news. Picture the moment when such information spreads through a colonial city. The baker who hears it from a dock worker, the scribe who learns it over his morning bread, the gradual realization that the man who founded their city, their patron and protector, has been struck down by his own friends in Rome's Senate House. For people living in this hybrid world of Greek heritage and Roman rule, Caesar's death meant uncertainty about everything. Would the new colony survive? Would their privileged position continue? Would the delicate balance between Greek and Roman culture hold? Or would everything need to be renegotiated with whoever emerged victorious from the power struggle that was sure to follow? This is how history really moves. Not through the grand gestures of generals and senators, but through the daily accommodations of ordinary people trying to make sense of forces beyond their control. Each morning brings the same human needs, bread and work and family, but the larger currents of politics and culture shape even these simple things in ways both obvious and subtle. The Roman conquest of Greece wasn't just a military event. It was a long conversation between civilizations, sometimes violent, sometimes creative, always complex. In the markets and workshops of reborn Corinth, that conversation continued every day, creating something that was neither purely Greek nor purely Roman, but entirely human. Picture yourself walking through the dusty streets of ancient Corinth, where the scent of fresh bread mingles with the salt air from the nearby harbor. In this bustling Greek city, under Roman rule, news travels fast through whispered conversations and worried glances. The baker at the corner market speaks in hushed tones about rumors from Rome, his flour-dusted hands gesturing anxiously as he shares what he's heard. This is how information spread in the ancient world, person to person, market to market. There were no newspapers, no television broadcasts, just merchants and travelers carrying stories across the Mediterranean, each tale growing more dramatic with every telling. The speed of news depended entirely on how fast a horse could gallop or a ship could sail. In the governmental district, Roman architecture rises proudly from Greek soil. But look closely, and you'll notice something fascinating. The columns aren't purely Roman. The decorative elements include subtle Greek touches. This wasn't accidental. Rome had learned a valuable lesson, one that many conquerors throughout history would forget. Complete cultural suppression breeds rebellion, while thoughtful adaptation creates acceptance. The Romans were remarkably practical about this. They understood that ruling an empire spanning 3 continents required more than just military might. It needed cultural intelligence, a willingness to bend without breaking. In Greece, they allowed local customs to flourish alongside Roman law. Greek tutors educated Roman children. Greek philosophers influenced Roman thought. And Greek artists found wealthy Roman patrons. Inside the administrative building, chaos replaces the usual ordered calm. Officials rush between offices clutching documents, their sandals echoing against marble floors. Clerks and scribes abandon their work to discuss the shocking news in small, worried groups. This scene would have been repeated across the Roman world, from Britain to Egypt, as word of Caesar's assassination spread like ripples across a pond. Gaius Septimius, a career administrator from central Italy, has spent a decade in Corinth. He represents thousands of Romans who made their lives in distant provinces, creating a complex web of cultural exchange. These weren't just conquerors imposing their will, they were neighbors, colleagues, sometimes even friends. The Roman Empire's longevity depended on these human connections, these daily interactions that gradually wove different peoples together. The assassination itself was brutal. 23 stab wounds inflicted by senators who claimed to be saving a republic. Brutus and Cassius led the conspiracy, convinced that killing Caesar would restore traditional Roman governance. They were tragically wrong. Caesar's death wouldn't save the republic, it would destroy it completely, ushering in centuries of imperial rule under the Caesars who followed. News of political upheaval always carries special weight in distant provinces. Roman citizens living far from home suddenly face uncertain futures. Their status, their security, even their lives might depend on which faction ultimately seizes power in Rome. History is full of such moments, when events in distant capitals reshaped the lives of ordinary people who had no voice in those decisions. The memories of previous civil wars still haunted Greece. Older residents remembered when Roman armies had marched back and forth across their land, fighting battles that had nothing to do with Greek interests, but everything to do with Greek survival. Cities had to choose sides carefully, knowing that backing the wrong faction could mean destruction. Athens had learned this lesson painfully during the conflict between Caesar and Pompey. The Athenians chose poorly, supporting Pompey, and suffered consequences when Caesar emerged victorious. Yet even in defeat, Athens survived, its cultural prestige protecting it from the worst retribution. This was the strange power of Greek civilization. It could be conquered, but never truly defeated. The work of translation reveals the delicate balance of Roman provincial administration. Every official announcement must be carefully crafted, acknowledging reality while maintaining stability. The Greek population needs information, but not panic. Roman authority must appear unshaken, even when Rome itself teeters on the edge of chaos. Language itself becomes a bridge between cultures. Greek and Latin borrowing words from each other, concepts flowing in both directions. Roman gods acquire Greek characteristics, while Greek deities gain Roman names. Jupiter becomes Zeus, Mars becomes Ares, Venus becomes Aphrodite. Religion, like everything else in this cosmopolitan world, adapts and evolves. This cultural blending created something entirely new, neither purely Greek nor purely Roman, but a Mediterranean civilization that would influence the world for centuries. In schools and libraries, Roman students studied Greek literature. In workshops and studios, Greek artisans created works for Roman patrons. In temples and theatres, old traditions took on new meanings. The Roman poet Horace captured this perfectly when he wrote that captured Greece had captured her fierce conqueror. Military victory belonged to Rome, but cultural influence flowed both ways. Greek philosophy shaped Roman thought, Greek art inspired Roman creativity, and Greek learning filled Roman libraries. Even routine administrative tasks reflect this complex relationship. Letters to village officials must be written with care, acknowledging local sensitivities while maintaining imperial authority. Every word matters when your job is to keep a diverse population calm during uncertain times. The physical act of writing, hand cramping after hours of careful lettering, reminds us how laborious communication was in the ancient world. No keyboards, no printing presses, just skilled scribes forming each letter by hand. Documents were precious because they required so much human effort to create. By midday, as the translation work finishes and copies are prepared for public posting, the immediate crisis has been managed. Order has been maintained, at least for now. But larger questions remain uncertain, hanging in the Mediterranean air, like storm clouds on the horizon. Picture yourself settling in for the evening, ready to drift away on a gentle journey back to ancient times. Tonight, we're visiting a world where news traveled slowly, where uncertainty hung in the air like morning mist, and where ordinary people found themselves caught in the currents of history. The sun was shining that spring day in ancient Corinth, casting long shadows across the bustling forum. People moved with purpose, but there was something different in their step, something cautious. Word had arrived from Rome, the kind of news that changes everything in an instant. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the known world, was dead, struck down by conspirators in the heart of the empire. In the provinces, life continued its rhythm, even as the world shifted beneath everyone's feet. Merchants still sold their wares, administrators still worked at their desks, and wine shops still served their customers. But conversations carried an undertone of worry, a recognition that when giants fall, the ground shakes for everyone. The Roman Empire had brought something precious to places like Corinth, something people had learned not to take for granted. They called it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For generations before Rome's dominance, Greek cities had torn each other apart in endless wars, brother fighting, brother neighbor, battling neighbor. The Romans, for all their faults, had ended that cycle of violence. Now that peace felt fragile, like a soap bubble floating on a breeze. In the wine shops and marketplaces, people spoke in hushed tones about what might come next. Some remembered stories their grandparents told, tales of the chaos that existed before Roman order arrived. Others whispered about opportunity, about chances that might arise if the empire's attention turned inward. Caesar's death was more than just the end of one man's life. It was the end of an era, though nobody quite knew it yet. He'd been gathering power like a child, collecting seashells, each title and honor adding to his growing authority. Some Romans feared he planned to crown himself king, a word that made their blood run cold. The Republic had been born from the ashes of monarchy, and the very idea of royal rule felt like betrayal to everything they held sacred. The conspirators, led by men like Brutus and Cassius, claimed they were defending ancient Roman values. They painted themselves as heroes, saving the Republic from tyranny. But politics is rarely that simple, and their motives were probably as tangled as fishing nets left too long in the sun. Power rarely changes hands cleanly, and revenge has a way of breeding more revenge. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, would not let this crime go unpunished. Neither would young Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, barely more than a boy but already showing signs of the cunning that ran in his family. The pieces were falling into place for another civil war, and everyone could sense it coming like a storm on the horizon. Greece found itself in an unfortunate position, caught between Rome and the eastern provinces where Caesar's killers had fled. When elephants fight, as the saying goes, it's the grass that suffers. The people of Corinth, understood this wisdom all too well. Military patrols increased in the city streets, their armor catching torchlight as they made their rounds. Centurions addressed crowds with careful words about maintaining order, about strictly enforcing curfews. The message was clear without being spoken: stay calm, stay quiet, and stay out of trouble. Most people were happy to comply. Prosperity has a way of making rebellion seem less attractive. The merchants who had grown wealthy under Roman rule, the craftsmen who sold their goods across the empire, the ordinary families who had known only peace in their lifetimes, they valued stability above all else, but not everyone felt the same way. In the shadows of uncertainty, other voices began to whisper. Some spoke of opportunity, of chances that might arise if Rome's attention turned to internal struggles. Old dreams of independence, buried but never quite forgotten, began to stir like seeds waiting for the right season to sprout. These conversations happened behind closed doors, in the privacy of homes where friends thought they could speak freely. The wine trade, which connected Greece to Italy, became a network for more than just commerce. Information flowed along those same routes, carrying rumors and possibilities along with amphorae of aged vintages. The merchant class found itself in a unique position during these uncertain times. They understood better than most how interconnected the ancient world had become under Roman rule. A disruption in Italy could affect grain shipments from Egypt. Unrest in one province could impact trade routes across the Mediterranean. Their livelihood depended on stability, yet they were also perfectly positioned to sense when that stability might be cracking. As evening fell on that pivotal day, oil lamps flickered to life in homes across Corinth. Their gentle glow provided comfort against the darkness, but also illuminated faces marked by worry and calculation. People tried to go about their normal routines, but normalcy felt like a costume that no longer quite fit. The ancient world was full of such moments, times when the future balanced on a knife's edge. History tends to remember the famous names and the grand battles, but it's often the quiet conversations between friends, the worried discussions in wine shops, the careful words of minor officials that reveal how momentous changes actually felt to the people living through them. In the days that followed Caesar's assassination, similar scenes played out across the Roman world. In distant Gaul, in the bustling streets of Alexandria, in the trading posts of Britain, people tried to make sense of what this death might mean for their own lives. Some saw opportunity in chaos, others feared the loss of everything they had built. The Roman Republic, that grand experiment in representative government, was entering its final act, though few could see it clearly at the time. The civil wars that followed would reshape the ancient world, giving birth to an empire that would last for centuries. But in that moment, in that wine shop in Corinth, on that spring day so long ago, all anyone could do was wait and wonder what tomorrow might bring. The news hits the small provincial office like a stone dropped into still water. Everyone knows what civil war means for places like this. It's not abstract politics anymore. It's empty granaries and roads clogged with soldiers who take what they need. The supervisor's words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Report seditious activities. The phrase sounds so official, so clean, but it really means, tell us if your neighbors are dreaming too loudly of freedom. You think about your friend, about his dangerous words spoken over untouched water. Independence from Rome. The idea had sounded so foreign then, like suggesting people should fly to the moon. But now, with Roman blood flowing in distant streets, maybe impossible dreams start feeling possible. It's funny how quickly the world can shift beneath your feet. Just months ago, Caesar seemed eternal. Rome seemed unshakable. People went about their daily business, paying taxes, following laws, never questioning the great machine that governed their lives. Then one man falls to 23 knife wounds, and suddenly everything that seemed permanent starts looking fragile. The Greeks in your office exchange glances. There's something in their eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't there before. Not rebellion exactly, but recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that the masters of the world are bleeding, and blood makes even giants look mortal. Your grandfather used to tell stories about the old days when Greek cities made their own decisions. Back when Athens and Sparta were names that made the world tremble, instead of tourist destinations for wealthy Romans. Those stories always felt like myths, like tales of dragons and heroes. Ancient history, safely buried under generations of Roman rule. But myths have a way of stirring when the present gets uncertain. The thing about being conquered is that you learn to make peace with it. You find ways to prosper under foreign rule. You adopt their customs. You even start thinking in their language sometimes. Your children grow up Roman in ways you never were. It becomes normal, even comfortable. Until suddenly it doesn't. The Roman citizens in Corinth are worried about their relatives in the capital, about property confiscations, about whether the political bloodletting will spread. Their concerns feel immediate and personal. But for the Greeks, the worry runs deeper, into older currents of memory and identity. They watch Romans killing Romans, and they remember that Rome isn't some natural force like weather or earthquakes. It's just people with swords and ambitions, and people can be defeated. The harbor starts filling with ships carrying fragments of news from the wider world. Each vessel brings contradictory reports, rumors that shift like smoke. Mark Antony controls the city. No, Octavian has raised an army. The Senate grants amnesty. No, they declare war. Truth becomes slippery when empires are tearing themselves apart. In the marketplace, conversations grow quieter, but more intense. People cluster in small groups, speaking in rapid Greek, their voices dropping when Roman officials pass by. The city feels like a pot slowly heating up, not boiling yet, but getting warmer. You find yourself walking different routes to work, unconsciously avoiding places where you might encounter your friend. Part of it is caution, the practical fear of association with dangerous ideas, but part of it is something deeper. You're not ready to face the questions he raised, the uncomfortable stirring of thoughts you'd kept safely buried. Identity is a complicated thing when you're caught between worlds. Your blood is Greek, but your position depends on Roman authority. You speak Greek at home, Latin at work. You honor Greek gods with Roman names. You've learned to be comfortable in this hybrid existence, to find advantage in being useful to the conquerors. But comfort is a fragile thing when the ground starts shaking. The news about the proscription lists sends a chill through everyone. Hundreds of names, prominent Romans marked for death. Their wealth seized to fund more killing. It's systematic, efficient, and absolutely terrifying in its scope. The triumvirs aren't just eliminating enemies, they're harvesting resources for war. If they can do this to Roman senators, what protection do provincial subjects have? The Greek community processes this news differently than their Roman neighbors. There's less personal fear, fewer direct connections to the victims, but there's a cold calculation happening. Rome's elite are devouring each other, weakening the whole structure. Weakness creates opportunity, even dangerous opportunity. Then comes word that makes everyone's blood run cold. Brutus and Cassius are raising armies in the east. The triumvirs are preparing to pursue them. Greece lies directly in their path. The province is about to become a battlefield again. Your supervisor's announcement makes it official. Prepare for troops. Stockpile supplies. Maintain roads and harbors. All of this requires additional taxation, forced labor, the usual burdens that fall on subjects when masters go to war. Greek farmers will feed Roman soldiers fighting other Roman soldiers over the corpse of the Roman Republic. There's a bitter irony in it that doesn't escape anyone. The warning about seditious talk feels pointed, deliberate. Eyes scan the room, measuring loyalties, calculating dangers. In times like these, friendship becomes complicated. Words spoken in private can become weapons in public. Trust becomes a luxury few can afford. You remember your friend's untouched cup of water, his passionate words about Greek freedom, his frustration with comfortable chains. Was he just dreaming aloud, or was he testing you? And if testing, what would he do with whatever answer he discovered? The weight of decision presses down on everyone now. Not grand political choices, but small daily ones that add up to something larger. Where to place loyalty, how to balance survival with principle, whether to whisper back when whispers come in the dark. History has a way of forcing these moments on ordinary people. Times when neutrality becomes impossible, and everyone must choose a side, even if all the sides look dangerous. In the dim glow of oil lamps, two old friends stood before a weathered statue of Poseidon, their conversation about to shape the meaning of identity itself. The shrine was small, forgotten, a relic from before Rome had rebuilt Corinth into something entirely new. One man spoke of freedom, the other of survival, and between them lay the weight of an impossible choice. Picture yourself caught between worlds, your very existence a contradiction. You translate documents by day, your skilled hands crafting messages that demand taxes, supplies, young men for auxiliary troops, all for a war between Romans, to decide which Romans would rule over you next. The irony burns like acid, each carefully chosen word a small betrayal of something you can't quite name. Your friend Thomas had grown thin, his eyes hollow with purpose. He spoke of fishing boats and secret journeys east of joining Brutus and Cassius in their rebellion against the triumvirate. Freedom, he called it. A chance for Greek cities to break Rome's grip forever. The passion in his voice carried the weight of centuries, the ghost of Pericles whispering through time. But passion, however pure, crashes against the rocks of reality. You had seen the reports, the numbers that told a different story. Roman legions marched across the known world, their discipline unbreakable, even while fighting amongst themselves. Greece stood divided, as it always had, city against city, brother against brother. Some would support Brutus, others Antony, and in the end Greeks would spill Greek blood for Roman causes. The administrative work had shown you something else, something your friend couldn't see from his hiding places and secret meetings. Rome's strength wasn't just in its armies, it was in its ability to absorb, to adapt, to make the conquered feel like partners in their own subjugation. Greek tutors taught Roman children. Greek philosophers advised Roman senators. Greek ideas flowed through Roman aqueducts, reaching places the old city-states had never dreamed of touching. Survival takes many forms, and sometimes the deepest victory looks like defeat. The Greece of Leonidas and his 300 was gone, swept away by time and tide. But something else remained, something that couldn't be conquered with swords or purchased with gold. Culture has its own kind of immortality, spreading like seeds on the wind, taking root in foreign soil and growing into something new. Your friend asked you to join his revolution, and when you declined, he asked for silence. "Just promise you won't betray us," he said, "for friendship's sake." The request cut to the bone, exposing the fundamental contradiction of your existence. Roman law demanded you report conspiracies. Greek loyalty demanded you protect your own. Your oath pulled one way, your blood another. Standing in that forgotten shrine, you understood something profound about the nature of conquest. Rome hadn't just taken Greek lands, it had taken Greek souls, forcing them into shapes that fit Roman needs. Every translation you wrote, every tax you helped collect, every young man you helped conscript, you participated in the slow dissolution of something ancient and irreplaceable. Yet there was another truth, harder to swallow, but no less real. The old Greece was already dead, had been dying long before Rome arrived. The city-states had torn themselves apart in endless wars, their democracy corrupted by demagogues, their philosophy turned to sophistry. Perhaps what lived on in Roman forms wasn't betrayal, but metamorphosis. The way a caterpillar dies, so a butterfly can be born. The choice you faced in that lamplit shrine wasn't really about betraying your friend or honoring your oath. It was about choosing which version of yourself you wanted to become, the Greek who remembered what was lost, or the Roman citizen who helped build what came next. Both paths led through darkness, both demanded sacrifices that would echo through generations. Your friend disappeared that night, slipping away on a fishing boat toward an uncertain dawn. You returned home to your scrolls and your translations, your careful words that softened harsh demands, without changing their essential meaning. The war would come regardless. Romans would fight Romans while Greeks chose sides and paid the price. But in the space between loyalty and survival, between memory and adaptation, something else emerged. A way of being that honored the past while embracing the future, that found strength in flexibility rather than rigid resistance. The statue of Poseidon watched over it all, god of the sea, master of tides and transformations, understanding better than mortals that sometimes the deepest currents flow beneath the surface. Invisible, but inexorable. Summer heat radiates from marble blocks scattered across the workshop floor, dust particles dancing in shafts of golden light that filter through narrow windows. The year is 66 AD, and Athens hums with anticipation, like a theatre audience moments before the curtain rises. A sculptor's hands, stained with marble dust and olive oil, pause mid-motion as news arrives from the governor's office. The Emperor Nero, passionate lover of all things Greek, will soon grace Athens with his presence. This announcement sends ripples of excitement and perhaps nervous tension through every corner of the ancient city. Workshops throughout Athens suddenly find themselves thrust into a peculiar dance between honoring ancestral traditions and pleasing Roman masters. The irony settles thick as marble dust. How Greek artisans must now interpret their own heritage through the lens of Roman expectations. Picture the challenge facing these craftsmen, their world balanced precariously between two cultures. On one hand, they carry the weight of centuries, the classical proportions and techniques passed down through generations of Greek masters. On the other, they must satisfy patrons who view Greek culture through distinctly Roman eyes, romanticizing and reshaping it to fit imperial tastes. The sculptor's workshop becomes a microcosm of this cultural complexity. 3 apprentices work alongside their master, 2 Greek boys raised on stories of Athens' golden age, and 1 young Roman, son of a merchant who settled in this storied city. Their chisels strike stone in unison, creating rhythms that echo both past and present. 30 days, the official document declares, to create decorative reliefs for the stadium where Nero will attend the games. Such deadlines reveal the Roman mind, efficiency, and practicality governing even artistic endeavors. No leisurely contemplation of muses here, simply clear instructions and ticking time. The commission itself tells a fascinating story about cultural adaptation. 4 panels depicting ancient Olympic scenes, but designed to subtly link Greek athletic tradition with Roman imperial virtues. Its artistry is diplomacy, creativity, serving political necessity. Sleep becomes scarce as the deadline approaches, snatched in brief moments when exhausted bodies simply refuse to continue. Yet there's something almost romantic about this urgency, the way entire communities mobilize around a single visit. Athens transforms itself. Buildings painted, streets cleaned, decorations erected throughout neighborhoods. The financial strain is enormous, stretching municipal resources and private purses alike. Citizens invest heavily in imperial favor, hoping for reduced taxes, new privileges, perhaps funding for public works. It's a gamble dressed as hospitality, pragmatism wearing the mask of cultural pride. Roman officials oversee every detail, their fluent but accented Greek, a constant reminder of who holds real power. They consult wax tablets, checklists, evaluate tax records alongside artistic reputations. Even creativity must prove its reliability, its adherence to schedules and budgets. The Emperor Nero presents a particularly interesting figure in this cultural theatre. Unlike some predecessors who viewed Greek culture with suspicion or indifference, he embraces it with enthusiastic Philhellenism. He sees himself as artist and athlete, poet and musician, embodying Greek ideals within Roman imperial framework. This creates unusual opportunities for Greek artists, who find their traditional skills suddenly valued by the most powerful man in the world. Yet they must navigate carefully, understanding that Roman appreciation for Greek culture comes with expectations, conditions, subtle requirements for loyalty, and political awareness. Workshop apprentices watch their master blend classical Greek proportions with naturalistic styles favored by contemporary Roman patrons. It's education in cultural compromise, learning to honor tradition while adapting to new realities. These young artists will carry these lessons forward, shaping how Greek artistic identity survives under Roman rule. The physical demands of meeting imperial deadlines take their toll. Hands grow rough and cracked from constant work. Backs and shoulders develop persistent aches that even hot baths at public thermae cannot fully ease. Yet there's deep satisfaction in this labor, connection to generations of sculptors who similarly brought gods and heroes forth from stone. Installation day arrives with its own tensions and excitements. Roman officials watch carefully as relief panels find their designated places, ensuring each catches light perfectly, displays imperial insignia appropriately, balances Greek heritage with Roman authority. The stadium itself becomes a canvas where two civilizations meet. Classical architecture adorned with flowers, colored streamers, and symbols of imperial power. Its visual representation of cultural fusion, ancient Greek spaces repurposed for Roman imperial theatre. Exhaustion and satisfaction mingle as the work concludes. Dust settled, deadlines met, artistic vision realized within political constraints. The sculptor collapses onto his sleeping couch, work clothes still dusty, mind already anticipating tomorrow's imperial arrival. This moment captures something essential about cultural survival under foreign rule. Greek artistic tradition doesn't simply disappear under Roman control. It adapts, evolves, finds new expressions while maintaining core elements. Artists become cultural ambassadors, their work bridging worlds, translating heritage into contemporary relevance. The relationship between artistic creation and political power reveals itself in these preparations, how creativity serves larger purposes beyond aesthetic expression. Art becomes diplomacy. Decoration transforms into statement. Individual craftsmanship merges with collective cultural identity. As night falls over Athens, workshops finally quiet. The city settles into anticipation. Tomorrow will bring imperial pageantry, the culmination of weeks of preparation, the test of whether Greek artistic tradition can successfully honor both ancestry and contemporary reality. The purple fabric catches first light as dawn breaks over ancient Athens. Purple, that color reserved for emperors alone, worn by a man who believes himself touched by divine Apollo. The dye comes from thousands of tiny murex shells, crushed and boiled until they surrender their precious color. Each thread cost more than most people earn in months. In the pre-dawn darkness, roosters have fallen silent. Even they seem to sense something different stirring in the city. The usual sounds of morning water sellers calling their wares, donkeys braying under heavy loads, children playing in narrow streets, all of this gives way to something grander, more orchestrated. Trumpets echo between marble columns, their bronze voices carrying news that travels faster than the imperial party itself. The sound bounces off temple walls, slides down hillsides, whispers into every corner where people live and work and dream. Somewhere in the city, a stone carver wakes to this unusual fanfare. His hands, permanently stained with marble dust, reach for his finest clothes. The chiton he pulls over his head feels foreign after months of rough work. Tunics, clean linen against skin, accustomed to grit and sweat. 20 years of marriage teaches many lessons. His wife Theodora knows when to tease, when to worry, when to speak truths that cut through excitement, like sharp bronze through soft stone. Her merchant family taught her to read people, to spot danger, hiding behind smiles and generous offers. Imperial attention, she understands, resembles fire. It warms when distant, burns when too close. This emperor particularly, with his love of Greek culture wrestling against his reputation for sudden cruelty, presents puzzles even philosophers might struggle to solve. Athens remembers many emperors, many processions, many promises. The city has learned to bend without breaking, to preserve its soul while acknowledging Roman power. Streets that once knew Pericles now prepare for Nero. adaptation written into every stone. The crowd gathering near the main gates tells Athens' entire story in human form. Citizens stand beside slaves, Greeks next to Romans, old families mixing with new arrivals, languages blend in the morning air. Though Greek still dominates, still claims this place despite centuries of foreign rule, waiting becomes its own form of endurance. The sun climbs higher, people shift and murmur, children grow restless in their parents' arms. Vendors understand opportunity, weaving through packed bodies with water jugs and honey cakes. Even imperial occasions create humble commerce. Hours pass like slow honey from a jar. Then, distant as summer thunder, cheering begins somewhere beyond sight. The sound grows, spreads, becomes a wave rolling toward those still waiting. Bodies press forward, anticipation sharp as temple incense. Standard bearers appear first, bronze eagles gleaming above the crowd. These symbols carry weight beyond their metal, representing power that spans from Britain's misty shores to Egypt's burning deserts. Every person watching understands what these eagles mean, what they promise, what they threaten. Behind the standards march Rome's finest soldiers, the Praetorian Guard. Their synchronized steps echo off stone pavements, each footfall a drumbeat of discipline. Armor polished to mirror brightness reflects watching faces, turning spectators into brief participants in this display of organized violence made beautiful. These soldiers follow the emperor everywhere, sworn to die rather than let harm touch their charge. They represent the sharp edge, hidden within every imperial smile, the final argument that settles all disputes. Local officials walk carefully in the middle ground between Roman authority and Athenian pride. The governor, appointed from distant Rome, shares space with Athens' own elected leaders. Each step requires diplomatic balance, acknowledging two masters, serving competing loyalties. Then comes the moment crowds have waited hours to witness. Nero himself, 30 years old and conscious of every watching eye, rides in a chariot that gleams like captured sunlight. Gold leaf covers wooden wheels, purple silk drapes cascade from bronze fittings, precious stones catch and scatter light like fallen stars. The emperor wears his divinity carefully, golden laurel leaves arranged in perfect imitation of Apollo's crown. His face, softer than classical statues suggest heroes should appear, nevertheless carries the confidence of someone who has never doubted his own importance. Practiced benevolence shapes his expression as he acknowledges the cheering masses. This performance, repeated in dozens of cities across the empire, requires stamina of its own kind. Smiling becomes labor, waving transforms into exhausting routine. His entourage stretches behind him like a golden snake, advisors and servants, and entertainers forming their own hierarchy of importance. Each person in this procession represents someone's ambition, someone's careful climb toward imperial favor. The display intentionally overwhelms, demonstrating wealth beyond easy counting. Voices blend in rhythmic chanting, titles pile upon titles in creative flattery. Friend of the Greeks, Apollo incarnate, bringer of golden peace. The words matter less than their music, their collective sound rising like prayers toward distant Olympus. The emperor particularly enjoys comparisons to Apollo, god of music, and light and healing. Nero fashions himself an artist, a poet, a performer worthy of divine comparison. Whether the gods appreciate such presumption remains their own mystery. Eventually, the golden river of the procession flows towards the Acropolis, that sacred hill where Athena's temple has watched over the city for centuries. Today, ancient rituals will welcome this foreign ruler who dreams of Greek glory while wielding Roman power. But most watchers cannot follow where the procession leads. Sacred spaces close their doors to common crowds, reserving their mysteries for priests and officials and emperors. The rest return to daily life, carrying memories of purple and gold, preparing for tomorrow's public games, where art meets politics in contests older than empires. Picture Athens on a summer evening, when the air itself seems to shimmer with possibility. The cobblestone streets, echo with footsteps, voices calling out in excitement, the distant sound of music drifting from doorways. Every corner of the city pulses with life, because this isn't just any ordinary night. The emperor has come to town, bringing with him his entire court, a parade of officials, servants, advisors, all the people who orbit around power like moths around a flame. You know how a city changes when something big is happening, when everyone wants to be part of the same moment. Athens feels like that now, stretched to its limits, every inn packed to bursting, families opening their homes to strangers, willing to pay for a place to sleep. Even private citizens have become innkeepers for the night, because opportunity doesn't knock very often in quite this way. In a quiet courtyard, away from the crowds, two people sit, sharing watered wine, the way friends do when they have something important to discuss. The woman, Theodora, leans forward with the kind of gossip that makes your eyes widen. She's heard something remarkable, something that challenges everything people expect from emperors and tradition. The ruler of Rome, she says, doesn't plan to simply watch the games from his comfortable seat. He wants to compete, to strip down like any other athlete, to risk victory and defeat in front of thousands. Now, this is the kind of news that stops conversations, that makes people set down their cups and really look at each other. Roman emperors don't do this, don't put themselves on equal footing with common competitors. There's something almost scandalous about it, like watching someone break an unspoken rule that everyone thought was permanent. The exclusivity of Greek competitions runs deep, like a river carved into stone over centuries. These games weren't created for foreigners, no matter how powerful they might be. They were meant to celebrate Greek identity, Greek excellence, Greek culture, especially under the weight of foreign rule. It's one of the few things that remained purely theirs, a space where being Greek mattered more than being Roman. But power has its own logic, doesn't it? When an emperor decides he wants something, the practical question becomes not whether it's appropriate, but who exactly plans to tell him no. And perhaps there's something touching about his desire, this powerful man who sees himself as Greek in spirit, who wants to honor these traditions by participating, rather than simply commanding them. The conversation turns to artistic ambition, the eternal hope of creators seeking recognition. Every sculptor, every artist, dreams of that moment when their work catches the eye of someone who can change everything. The great artists of Greece had always understood this dance between talent and patronage, how the most magnificent works often emerged from the marriage of skill and powerful sponsorship, yet history whispers warnings to those who listen carefully. Even Phidias, who created the golden Athena that crowned the Parthenon, found that working for the powerful could be a double-edged sword. His magnificent sculptures brought him fame, but also accusations, political intrigue, and ultimately disgrace. The same hands that had shaped gods from marble ended up bound by very human chains of suspicion and scandal. The next morning arrives with the kind of anticipation that makes entire cities hold their breath. The Panathenaic Stadium sits nestled between hills like a marble jewel, its U-shaped embrace, ready to hold thousands of spectators. This ancient structure has seen renovations over the years, each generation adding their own improvements, the most recent funded by a wealthy Roman who understood that sometimes the best way to honor Greek culture is to preserve it in marble and gold. Every seat fills as the morning progresses, the crowd creating that particular energy that comes when masses of people share the same excitement. The summer heat begins to build early, the kind of Mediterranean warmth that makes shade precious and water a constant necessity. Wide-brimmed hats become essential armor against the sun, and everyone carries flasks filled with cool water from home. The ceremony begins with trumpet blasts that seem to shake the very stones of the stadium. Athletes march in formation, their bodies gleaming with oil that catches the sunlight like liquid bronze. These are men who have dedicated their lives to physical perfection, whose muscles tell stories of countless hours of training, discipline, sacrifice. Behind them come officials in their formal robes, priests who will ensure that the sacred aspects of competition are properly observed. And then, to thunderous applause mixed with whispers of uncertainty, comes the emperor himself. But this isn't the toga-wearing ruler of Rome. This is a man dressed as a Greek athlete, his arms and legs bare, his entire appearance announcing his intention to compete rather than merely observe. The sight sends a ripple through the crowd, excitement wrestling with tradition, cheers competing with murmurs of disapproval. The games unfold with ancient ritual, prayers ascending to the gods, sacrifices ensuring divine favor for the competitions ahead. Foot races showcase the pure speed of human bodies pushed to their limits, each runner a testament to what dedication can achieve. For those watching with an artist's eye, every movement becomes a lesson in anatomy, every stride a study in how muscle and bone work together to create grace under pressure. But then comes an announcement that changes everything, that transforms anticipation into something closer to shock. The emperor will participate in the chariot race, the most dangerous of competitions where even experienced charioteers risk everything. Suddenly the crowd must grapple with possibilities no one had quite imagined. What happens if an emperor is injured, or humiliated, or worse? What happens when absolute power meets the absolute unpredictability of racing horses and spinning wheels? The day stretches ahead with wrestling matches and other contests. But now every event feels like preparation for that one moment when history might pivot on the outcome of a single race. The evening air in Athens carried the smell of olive oil and dust as crowds began to gather. Something extraordinary was about to unfold in the ancient stadium. Word had spread through the narrow streets that the emperor himself would compete today, not just watch from his gilded seat, but actually take part in the chariot races. Nero had already been making quite the impression during his tour of Greece. This wasn't his first time competing in the sacred games. He had a particular fondness for these Greek traditions, these competitions that stretched back centuries before Rome ever existed. The emperor saw himself as something of an artist, a performer, someone who truly understood the soul of Greek culture. As the day wore on, the anticipation became almost unbearable. First came the wrestling matches, then the discus throwing, each event built toward the main spectacle. The crowd knew what they were really here to see. Finally, the moment arrived. The chariots rolled into the stadium. These weren't simple vehicles. They were magnificent contraptions, each pulled by 4 powerful horses. The professional charioteers took their positions with the easy confidence of men who had done this countless times. And there among them stood Nero himself, positioned prominently at the starting line. The trumpet blast echoed through the stadium. Dust exploded into the air as thundering hooves pounded the earth. The crowd leaped to their feet, cheering with wild abandon. 10 circuits around the stadium, that was the race. At first, everything seemed normal. Nero held his position right in the middle of the pack, neither leading nor falling behind. But as the laps continued, something became clear. The professional charioteers began pulling ahead. Their skill showed in every movement, especially in how they navigated those dangerous tight turns at each end of the stadium. These men had spent their lives perfecting this art. By the 5th lap, Nero had started falling behind. Then disaster struck on the 6th lap. His chariot caught a wheel on the turning post. For a terrifying moment, it looked like the whole thing might overturn. Somehow, the emperor managed to regain control, but now he was far behind the leaders. The race seemed all but over. That's when something very strange began to happen. The professional charioteers who had been racing with such skill and determination started to slow down. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but soon it became unmistakable to anyone paying attention. By the final lap, Nero had somehow worked his way up to 2nd place. As they approached the finish line, the leading charioteer did something extraordinary. He pulled his horses back slightly, just enough to allow the emperor to pass and claim victory. The crowd's reaction was fascinating to observe. There were cheers, certainly, but there were also knowing looks exchanged between spectators. Everyone understood what had just happened. No one would say it aloud, of course. Emperors won because emperors always won, whether in battle politics or sport. That was simply how the world worked. The victory ceremony proceeded with all the traditional honors. Nero received his olive wreath crown with what appeared to be genuine humility, but you could see the pleasure shining in his eyes. He was clearly delighted with his victory, regardless of how it had been achieved. His victory speech was delivered in Greek, with only a slight accent, betraying his Roman origins. He praised Athens as the mother of games and arts, the fountainhead of civilization that Rome had wisely chosen to embrace, rather than simply conquer. It was a skillful piece of rhetoric, acknowledging Greek cultural pride while reinforcing Roman political dominance. The crowd responded warmly. Their earlier skepticism seemed to soften in the face of the emperor's obvious enthusiasm for their traditions. Even if he didn't embody those traditions perfectly, his passion appeared genuine. As the games concluded and people began to disperse, an unexpected moment occurred. An official approached one section of the crowd, consulting a tablet before calling out a specific name. Several people turned to look with curiosity at the person being summoned. The announcement came that the governor requested this person's presence at the evening reception. Their work on the stadium reliefs had been noted favorably. For someone who had been hoping for exactly this kind of recognition, it must have felt like their heart might burst. This was the opportunity they had been dreaming of. A chance to be seen by the imperial court, perhaps even by Nero himself. The preparation for such an evening would have been intense. Not just good clothes, but the absolute finest garments, the kind reserved for religious festivals and family weddings. Every detail would matter, down to a simple silver pin marking membership in an old Athenian family, not wealthy or politically powerful, but respectable. The governor's residence was a marvel of combined Greek and Roman luxury. Upon entering, guests were announced by name and profession. The room filled with the elite of Roman Greece, provincial officials, wealthy merchants, landowners, visiting dignitaries from across the empire. Expensive perfumes hung heavy in the air, while servants circulated with wine and elaborate delicacies. The conversations flowed between Greek and Latin, sometimes switching languages within the same sentence. For someone not accustomed to such gatherings, it would have been overwhelming. The social dynamics played out like a carefully choreographed dance, the deference shown to Roman officials, the careful self-assurance of wealthy Greeks, the subtle competition for attention and favor. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Nero's arrival created an immediate stir. He had changed from his athletic wear into formal attire that artfully blended Roman and Greek elements. The entire room reorganized itself around him, like iron filings aligning with a powerful magnet. The emperor's interaction with guests revealed something interesting about his character. When he spoke to the sculptor about their stadium work, his compliment was specific and knowledgeable. He understood the body in motion, as well as classical predecessors, he said. This wasn't just prepared praise, it suggested he had actually looked closely at the work. But the evening's most significant moment came when Nero made an unexpected announcement. He had always believed that Greek art represented the pinnacle of human achievement, he declared. Rome provided structure, law, order, roads, aqueducts, but Greece provided the soul, the beauty. Then came the bombshell. He had decided to grant Greece special status within the empire. At the Isthmian Games in Corinth, he would officially proclaim the freedom of the Greeks. Tax exemptions, local autonomy, restoration of traditional rights, recognition of Greece's unique place in their shared civilization. The room erupted. This was apparently news to everyone present, including some Roman officials who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Greek attendees ranged from cautiously optimistic to openly celebratory, though the politically astute expressed skepticism about what this freedom would actually mean in practice. After centuries of Roman rule, what could freedom for Greece possibly entail? It certainly couldn't mean actual independence. Rome would never relinquish control of such a strategically important province. But perhaps fewer taxes, less direct interference from Roman officials, even symbolic recognition of Greek dignity had value after so many years as subjects. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, the city itself seemed different. Perhaps it was just perception altered by wine and unexpected elevation to imperial notice. Or perhaps Nero's announcement really had changed something in the very atmosphere of Athens. The conversations continued long into the night as people tried to understand what they had witnessed. Was this a meaningful change in status, or merely a symbolic gesture from an emperor known for grand but sometimes empty declarations? Time would tell, but for now, the possibility of change hung in the air like incense in a temple. Picture yourself in ancient Athens, standing in the gentle morning light that filters through olive branches. The air carries whispers of cypress and distant sea salt, while dappled shadows dance across scattered scrolls. It's a peaceful spring day in 128 AD, and Emperor Hadrian's reign has brought a golden calm to this ancient city. You are a philosopher, 55 years old, with silver threading through your hair and beard. Your mind remains as sharp as ever, perhaps sharper, seasoned by decades of wrestling with life's deepest questions. Students travel from across the Roman Empire just to sit in your modest home on the slopes of the Areopagus Hill, eager to drink from the well of Greek wisdom you offer. Your teaching room faces east, naturally, to catch that precious morning light. Shelves line the walls, heavy with scrolls and the newer bound books, called codices, that your Roman students seem to prefer. There's something charming about these cultural preferences, these small ways that identity reveals itself in daily choices. Simple wooden benches form a semicircle, waiting for the day's discourse to begin. Your teaching table holds the tools of your trade, wax tablets for quick notes, a water clock to mark the passage of time, and a small bust of Socrates, worn smooth in places where countless thoughtful fingers have touched it over the years. You adjust your chiton, that traditional Greek garment that feels like a second skin after all these years. Some Athenians have adopted Roman styles, following fashion's fickle winds, but you prefer the soft, draped fabric of your ancestors. Over your shoulders rests a himation of fine wool, dyed deep blue, marking your status as an established teacher, without being too showy about it. Your first student arrives exactly as the water clock marks the hour. Marcus Cornelius moves with the confidence of youth and privilege. The son of a wealthy Roman official stationed in Athens. At 18, he shows genuine promise, that rare combination of Roman practicality and growing appreciation for Greek philosophical thinking. His Greek flows smoothly, though his Italian accent still peeks through like sunlight between clouds. More students filter in over the next quarter hour, creating a fascinating tapestry of backgrounds and origins. Greeks and Romans mix naturally, mostly young men, but including 2 Greek women from prominent Athenian families. This diversity reflects something beautiful about Athens under Hadrian's rule, how cultural boundaries have begun to blur, how intellectual curiosity can unite people who might otherwise remain strangers. By the time you begin, 12 expectant faces look back at you. You start, as always, with a question, rather than pronouncements. This is the Socratic way, after all, to let wisdom emerge through inquiry, rather than impose it from above. The familiar rhythm of philosophical discourse unfolds like a well-rehearsed dance. Students offer their thoughts tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the conversation builds momentum. You guide rather than dictate, asking probing questions that challenge comfortable assumptions and encourage deeper thinking. The Greeks in your class tend to reference their cultural traditions, drawing on centuries of accumulated wisdom. The Romans often bring a more practical perspective, asking how these ideas might work in the real world of politics and commerce. This creates a rich exchange, like different instruments in an orchestra finding harmony together. As the discussion flows, your mind briefly wanders to how dramatically Athens has changed during your lifetime. When you were born, the city was still struggling to recover from centuries of decline following the Roman conquest. Ancient monuments crumbled slowly, like elderly men forgetting their former strength. The population had dwindled far from its classical heights, when Athens was the beating heart of the Greek world. The Romans had always valued Greek culture, of course, but their attitude toward actual Greeks was complicated. They respected the past while showing condescension toward the present, like admiring a beautiful ruin while ignoring the people still living among its stones. But Emperor Hadrian has transformed everything. During his remarkable reign, a true lover of Greek culture, he has poured imperial resources into rebuilding the city with unprecedented generosity. The massive temple of Olympian Zeus, which stood unfinished for nearly 600 years like a stone promise waiting to be kept, has finally been completed under his patronage. He constructed a vast library, that temple to learning that draws scholars from across the known world. An entirely new district has risen, called Hadrianopolis, extending the city's boundaries and possibilities. More importantly than these physical improvements, he has elevated the status of Greeks within the empire itself, creating the Pan-Hellenic League that celebrates Hellenic identity while maintaining loyalty to Rome. Your attention returns to the present, as Marcus poses a particularly insightful question about the relationship between virtue and happiness. These moments remind you why you chose this life of teaching, why you wake each morning eager to engage with these fundamental questions that have puzzled humanity since we first learned to think about thinking. The morning session passes with surprising speed, intellectual energy filling the room like incense in a temple. Ideas are proposed, examined from multiple angles, refined through dialogue, and sometimes transformed into something entirely new. When the water clock marks midday, you conclude the formal lesson, though several students always linger, reluctant to break the spell of genuine inquiry. These informal conversations often prove the most rewarding part of teaching. There's something magical about the spontaneous exchanges that occur when young minds are truly engaged with life's deepest questions, when the artificial boundaries between teacher and student begin to dissolve. Marcus stays behind as he often does, his curiosity apparently inexhaustible. The others eventually drift away, carrying fragments of the morning's wisdom back into their daily lives, where philosophy must somehow coexist with the practical demands of earning bread and raising families. This is perhaps the eternal challenge, isn't it? Bridging the gap between the ideal and the real, between the world as philosophers imagine it might be, and the world as it actually is. In this Athens of 128 AD, under Hadrian's enlightened rule, that gap seems smaller than usual, the possibilities more promising. The afternoon stretches ahead with its own rhythms and requirements, but the morning's questions will linger, as the best questions always do, like seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting for the right moment to bloom into understanding. Picture a teacher in ancient Athens, a man whose world sits balanced between two great civilizations. The afternoon sun filters through his small courtyard as he tends to his simple garden. A pomegranate tree casts shadows over fragrant herbs, and the air carries the scent of olives ripening on distant groves. His student Marcus appears at the garden gate, excitement barely contained beneath his formal composure. The young man brings news, an invitation to witness something extraordinary. Tomorrow, the emperor himself will dedicate a temple that has stood unfinished for 7 centuries. 700 years. Imagine that. Generations upon generations of Athenians walking past scaffolding and half-built walls, wondering if they would ever see completion. The temple belongs to Zeus, king of the gods, and its story stretches back through mist and memory. A ruler named Pisistratos began this monument when Athens was young, when democracy was just a wild dream in the minds of revolutionaries. Century after century passed, and the temple remained frozen, in time, a promise unfulfilled. But now Emperor Hadrian has arrived, bringing Roman engineering and endless resources. What the Greeks conceived in their golden age, the Romans have finally brought to life. Marcus speaks of union between cultures, of Greek wisdom married to Roman strength. His father, a government official, sees politics in stone and marble. The teacher strokes his beard thoughtfully, considering this invitation. To witness such an event as an honored guest rather than a face in the crowd, this represents something special indeed. Few will stand close enough to see the emperor's expression, to hear the prayers echo off newly carved columns. After Marcus departs, The teacher returns to his afternoon rituals. Bread and cheese, olives and wine, mixed with water. The same meal philosophers have eaten for centuries, simple food that nourishes without distraction. He breaks bread under his pomegranate tree, thinking about permanence and change. His afternoon belongs to writing, to wrestling with ideas that have puzzled thinkers since Plato walked these same streets. He works on a commentary about ideal governments, about how societies should organize themselves. It's delicate work, this philosophical dancing. He must explore dangerous questions about power and justice, while living under an empire that tolerates intellectual curiosity, but not political rebellion. The shadows grow longer, and evening approaches with its own obligations. Herodes Atticus has extended an invitation, and one does not refuse the wealthiest man in Athens. Herodes represents something new in their world, a Greek who has embraced Roman citizenship, a man who builds bridges between old traditions and new realities. The walk through Athens reveals layers of history at every turn. Here stands the ancient agora, where Socrates once cornered unsuspecting citizens with impossible questions about virtue and knowledge. Roman emperors have restored these spaces, adding their own architectural flourishes to monuments that predate their empire by centuries. The Acropolis rises against the darkening sky, the Parthenon still magnificent despite its age. New buildings cluster around its base, funded by Roman gold but designed with Greek sensibilities. Every stone tells stories of cultural collision and cooperation. Herodes lives in a mansion that embodies his divided loyalties. Greek courtyards flow into Roman reception halls. Mosaics tell stories from Homer, alongside scenes of imperial triumph. Statues of ancient philosophers stand next to marble emperors, creating silent conversations across centuries. 20 guests gather for the evening's symposium, a mixture that would have seemed impossible in earlier ages. Athenian scholars discuss poetry with Roman administrators. Visitors from distant provinces share wine with local intellectuals. Greek and Latin blend in the air like musical harmonies, each language carrying its own cultural weight. The evening follows ancient symposium traditions, but with subtle Roman modifications. Some guests recline on couches as Greeks have done for generations. Others prefer Roman chairs and tables, bringing different customs to the same conversation. Wine flows diluted with water, respecting Greek preferences, while exotic Roman delicacies supplement familiar Mediterranean fare. These cultural negotiations happen constantly, now, in every aspect of daily life. Language, food, furniture. Even the way people sit together reflects the ongoing dance between Greek heritage and Roman innovation. Nothing remains purely one thing or another. Everything adapts, evolves, finds new forms. The conversation turns to tomorrow's dedication ceremony, and excitement ripples through the room. Emperor Hadrian has transformed Athens during his reign, funding construction projects and supporting intellectual pursuits. He represents the best possibilities of imperial rule, a philosopher-emperor who genuinely appreciates Greek culture while wielding Roman power. But such political discussions require careful navigation in mixed company. Philosophical speculation about ideal governments remains acceptable, even encouraged. Direct criticism of current arrangements, however, crosses dangerous lines. Everyone understands these boundaries instinctively, having learned to think freely while speaking cautiously. The teacher participates actively, but watches his words, aware that tonight's conversations might be remembered tomorrow by people with different loyalties. This constant awareness shapes every gathering, every friendship, every intellectual exchange. Freedom and constraint dance together in the shadows of empire. The ancient world has always been a place where cultures meet and blend, creating something entirely new from old traditions. Picture an emperor preparing for one of the most secretive religious ceremonies of the ancient world, the Eleusinian Mysteries. These weren't your typical temple visits. They were ancient secret rites that had survived for centuries, even as empires rose and fell around them. Now imagine being the very first emperor to receive full initiation into these sacred mysteries. The honor would be extraordinary, but it was also something much more calculated than simple devotion. When powerful Romans embraced Greek religious traditions, they weren't just showing respect, they were making a statement, strengthening their grip on the eastern provinces through cultural connection rather than force alone. The relationship between Greeks and Romans, after nearly 300 years of imperial rule, was fascinating, really. It was like watching two dance partners who had learned each other's steps so well that sometimes you couldn't tell who was leading. Romans found that appreciating Greek culture made them seem more sophisticated, more worthy of the power they wielded. Meanwhile, Greeks discovered that Roman patronage could bring real benefits, even if their dreams of political independence had long since faded into memory. These ancient symposiums would stretch deep into the evening hours, filled with musical performances and poetry that echoed off marble walls. Picture walking home under those brilliant Mediterranean stars, your mind buzzing with intellectual conversations that had ranged across philosophy, politics, and religion. Sleep would come easily after such stimulating days, but dreams often became vivid before important events. In those dreams, you might see the Acropolis as it appeared in its golden age, then watch it slowly transform. Roman elements would blend seamlessly with Greek architecture, neither tradition completely displacing the other. Instead, they created something entirely new, just as Athens itself had learned to do over the centuries. When morning arrived with clear skies, ancient peoples would have taken this as a favorable sign from the gods. Getting dressed for a temple dedication ceremony required special care. The finest chiton and himation weren't just clothing, they were statements of respect for both the religious significance of the day and the imperial presence that would grace the ceremony. A simple olive wreath, placed carefully on one's head, would mark someone as a philosopher of the traditional Athenian schools. Meanwhile, a young Roman might wear the toga praetexta, indicating his father's official status. Despite the formal Roman appearance, youthful excitement has always been universal, transcending any cultural boundaries. There's something touching about these ancient moments when people acknowledge their differences while walking together towards shared experiences. A Greek philosopher might observe how Roman someone looked, while the young Roman would glance down at his toga, adjusting its drape with the self-consciousness that comes with wearing ceremonial clothing. These weren't just individual choices, though. When someone represented Rome or Athens, they carried the weight of tradition and expectation. Age brought with it the privilege and burden of becoming a living connection to the past, a bridge between what was and what had become. Temple dedications drew crowds from across the known world, creating festival atmospheres that would make the streets buzz with activity. Vendors would set up stalls selling food, drinks, and small commemorative tokens that people could take home as memories. Traditional music would fill the air, while the scent of incense mixed with cooking smells and the distinctive odor that comes with large crowds gathering on warm days. Roman guards would check invitations at checkpoints, separating the general public from reserved areas meant for official guests. Here, the elite of the eastern provinces would mingle carefully with Roman officials, everyone positioning themselves for the best possible view of the upcoming ceremony. The temples themselves told stories in stone and marble. These massive structures dominated ancient landscapes, their Corinthian columns rising to heights that must have seemed impossible to achieve. The architecture would follow Greek traditions, but on distinctly Roman scales, creating effects that felt both familiar and startlingly novel to local sensibilities. What's remarkable is how these moments of cultural fusion created lasting changes that went far beyond single ceremonies or individual relationships. They represent something timeless about human nature, our ability to adapt and blend traditions while still maintaining our distinct identities. Picture this scene, if you will. The morning sun strikes white marble, so bright it almost hurts to look at. This is the temple of Olympian Zeus, finally complete after centuries of waiting. The marble seems to glow against that perfect blue Mediterranean sky, every carved detail sharp and clear in the light. Now imagine standing there on that day, in 132 AD, watching history unfold. The crowds have gathered, Romans and Greeks side by side, all waiting for the same moment. Emperor Hadrian himself is coming to dedicate this massive temple, this monument that took longer to build than most civilizations last. The temple itself tells quite a story. Construction began way back in the 6th century BC, under a tyrant named Pisistratos. But like so many ambitious projects, it ran out of money, ran out of political support, ran out of steam. For centuries, it sat there unfinished, a skeleton of columns and broken dreams. People probably walked past it every day, wondering if anyone would ever complete what someone else had started so long ago. Then, along came Antiochus IV, a Hellenistic king with big plans and deeper pockets. He took up the project in the 2nd century BC, hired Roman architects, started making real progress. But even he couldn't finish it. Wars intervened, kingdoms fell, the marble columns stood waiting once again. It's funny how some projects seem cursed, isn't it? This temple waited through the rise and fall of classical Athens, through Alexander's conquests, through the messy collapse of his empire. It watched Rome grow from a small Italian city to the master of the Mediterranean. All those generations of Athenians walked past these unfinished columns, probably wondering what their ancestors had been thinking. But Hadrian, now there was an emperor with a vision. He didn't just see a half-built temple, he saw possibility. He saw a way to honor both Greek tradition and Roman power. So he opened the imperial treasury, brought in the best craftsmen, and finally, after more than 600 years, gave Athens the temple it had been dreaming of. The finished building was enormous by Greek standards. Where classical temples favored harmony and proportion, this one went for pure scale. It measured over 300 feet long, with columns that towered 56 feet into the sky. The Athenians had never seen anything quite like it. Some loved it, others thought it a bit much for their refined tastes. That dedication day must have been quite a spectacle. The imperial procession wound through Athens streets, past buildings both ancient and newly restored. First came the lictors with their fasces, those bundles of rods that symbolized Roman authority. Then the Praetorian guards in their polished armor, looking impressive and slightly out of place in this Greek city. The Athenian officials followed, wearing their traditional robes but carrying Roman insignia. It was a perfect symbol of their situation, really. Still Greek in culture and heart, but Roman in politics and power. They had traded independence for security, autonomy for prosperity, and then came Hadrian himself. At 52, he cut quite a figure. His beard was full and philosophical, styled in the Greek manner he'd made fashionable among Romans. He walked rather than rode in a litter, showing respect for the sacred ground he was approaching. Those who saw him that day said he looked genuinely engaged, not like some bored official going through the motions. This was the emperor's second visit to Athens, and his love for the city was obvious. He'd already founded a whole new district called Hadrianopolis, spent fortunes restoring old monuments, established new festivals. Some people back in Rome grumbled about all this spending on provincial cities, but Hadrian had a different vision of empire. The ceremony itself blended traditions beautifully. Greek priests made offerings to Zeus, according to ancient rituals, while Roman officials gave speeches praising imperial generosity. When Hadrian spoke, he used perfect Greek, another sign of his Philhellenism. The crowd loved it. But the real surprise came at the end. Hadrian announced additional gifts for Athens: money for schools, restoration projects, grain distributions for the poor. Each announcement brought louder applause, especially from ordinary citizens who would actually benefit from these programs. You have to wonder what the older Athenians thought, watching all this. Their grandparents had lived through the bad times, when Athens was still recovering from earlier Roman campaigns. The city had been smaller then, poorer, its population reduced, its famous monuments crumbling from neglect. The transformation under imperial patronage was remarkable. New buildings rose, old ones were restored. Trade flourished under the protection of Roman legions. The price, of course, was freedom. Athenians no longer debated policy in the agora or voted on declarations of war. Those decisions were made in Rome now. But perhaps that wasn't entirely bad. The old Athens, the democratic Athens of Pericles, had been glorious but unstable. It had given the world philosophy and theatre and architecture, but it had also spent decades fighting ruinous wars. The new Athens under Rome was quieter, safer, more prosperous for ordinary people. After the ceremony, the celebration spilled into the streets. Temporary wine shops appeared at major intersections. Impromptu performances drew crowds in small squares. Athens felt alive in a way it hadn't for generations, different from its classical golden age, certainly, but vibrant in its own way. The completed temple stood as a symbol of this new Athens. Not quite Greek, not quite Roman, but something that combined elements of both traditions. It represented compromise, adaptation, the way civilizations learn to survive by changing with the times. And Hadrian himself. He went on to visit his new gymnasium, inspect restoration work on other monuments, probably dropped by the famous academy to discuss philosophy with local scholars. This was an emperor who genuinely loved Greek culture, who saw himself as a protector of ancient wisdom rather than just a conqueror. The whole story makes you think about time, doesn't it? About how long some dreams take to fulfill, how many different hands contribute to any great achievement. That temple wasn't really built by any one person or even one generation. It was built by centuries of ambition, failure, renewed hope, and finally, imperial determination. Picture Athens as the sun sets, where ancient marble catches the last golden light. A philosopher walks home through streets that have witnessed 7 centuries of dreams and disappointments. The great temple of Zeus, the Olympian, finally stands complete after all this time. Generations upon generations had started it, stopped it, forgotten about it, remembered it again. This wasn't just any building project. This was the stubborn heartbeat of a city that refused to give up on itself. 700 years of starts and stops, of ambitious rulers who thought they could finish what others had begun. Each century brought new hands, new ideas, new reasons to pause the work. Wars interrupted, money ran out, empires fell, and still the columns waited. The Romans, with their practical minds and endless resources, had finally done what the Greeks couldn't quite manage on their own. They brought Roman efficiency to Greek dreams. The irony tastes bitter and sweet at the same time. The conquerors completing what the conquered had imagined centuries before they were even conquered. Walking through these streets, you can almost hear the conversations floating through time. Students debating with their teachers about what it all means. A young Roman student, raised on stories of Roman greatness, finds himself drawn to Greek wisdom. He asks the hard questions that make philosophers pause and think carefully before answering. What does it mean to trade independence for security? The Greeks had known fierce, beautiful freedom. They had invented democracy, where citizens actually had a voice in their own fate. They had created philosophy, theatre, mathematics that still shapes how we think. But freedom, as it turns out, doesn't always pay the bills or keep the armies away. Rome offered something different. Stability that stretched across continents, trade routes that brought prosperity to distant corners, the chance to be part of something vast and organized, even if it meant giving up the right to make all your own choices. It's the eternal trade-off that societies face again and again throughout history. The philosopher considers this as he reaches his home. His student Marcus represents this new world where Greek thought and Roman power blend together like wine and water, neither purely one thing nor the other, but something entirely new. These young people inherit 2 traditions, 2 ways of seeing the world, 2 sets of expectations. What wisdom do you pass on to someone living between worlds? How do you teach them to honor what came before while embracing what exists now? The answers don't come easily, which is probably why they're worth thinking about. Night settles over the city, bringing with it the distant sounds of celebration. People are still talking about the ceremony, the completion of this monument that outlasted empires. The temple stands now as proof that some dreams survive even when the dreamers don't. Greek imagination, Roman determination, all mixed together in marble and time. In his courtyard, the philosopher listens to Athens settling into sleep. This city that has been so many different things to so many different people. The birthplace of democracy, the conquered province, the cultural center that somehow maintains its identity even under foreign rule. It's neither the Athens of Pericles nor a simple Roman town, but something uniquely itself. The Temple of Zeus tells this story without words. Greek columns reaching toward the sky, with Roman precision holding them steady. A building that embodies adaptation, the art of becoming something new, without losing what made you special in the first place. It's a lesson written in stone about survival, about finding ways to preserve what matters most, even when everything else changes. These thoughts follow the philosopher towards sleep, mixing with the night sounds and gentle breezes. Consciousness fades slowly, like ink dissolving in water. The last image floating through his mind is that temple, finally complete, standing there as proof that some things endure, that patience sometimes wins over speed, that the most important projects often take longer than any single lifetime to finish. The river of time flows on, carrying dreams and empires, philosophers and students, conquerors and conquered, all swirling together in the endless current of human experience. Some things are lost forever, others transform into something unrecognizable, and a precious few somehow manage to remain essentially themselves, no matter how much the world changes around them. The morning light filters through narrow palace windows in Constantinople, where a 50-year-old Greek scholar sits, surrounded by stacks of parchment and legal documents. This is the year 532 AD, and he's deep into one of history's most ambitious projects. For over 2 years now, he's been part of a small team working to organize centuries of Roman legal traditions into what will become known as the Corpus Juris Civilis. The work is painstaking, requiring fluency in both Latin and Greek. Latin remains the official language of Roman law, but Greek has become the everyday tongue of the Eastern Empire. This linguistic split tells a larger story about identity and change. The empire calls itself Roman, yet its heart beats with Greek rhythm. Outside the palace walls, Constantinople spreads like a jeweled tapestry toward the sea. Ships from distant lands crowd the harbor, carrying goods, people, and ideas from every corner of the known world. The city itself was built to outshine ancient Rome, Constantine's vision of a Christian empire, with unmistakably Greek characteristics. Domes and spires catch the early sunlight, creating shadows that dance across marble streets and busy marketplaces. The scholar sets down his quill, fingers cramped from hours of careful writing. His wooden chair, though beautifully carved, wasn't designed for comfort. Such is the nature of imperial grandeur, where form often trumps function. He rises, woolen robes falling in heavy folds, and moves to the window for a moment's respite. Even after decades in the city, the view still takes his breath away. He'd arrived from Athens as a young man, seeking education and opportunity. The scale and magnificence had overwhelmed him then. Now familiar, it remains no less impressive. This is what happens when ambition meets unlimited resources, when an emperor decides to create something that will outlast his own mortality. A soft knock interrupts his contemplation. Theodoros enters, his young assistant from Antioch. There's something of the scholar's younger self in this eager young man, caught between the classical past and the Christian present. He carries the morning dispatches, sealed documents that bring news from across the empire's vast territories. But there's tension in Theodoros's normally composed features. Beyond official correspondence, rumors swirl through the city's forums and markets. The blues and greens, supposedly just chariot racing factions, fought again the previous night. 3 dead, a shop burned. What began centuries ago as simple sports rivalry has evolved into something far more complex and dangerous in Constantinople's politically charged atmosphere. These factions have become vehicles for deeper disputes, religious and political grievances that simmer beneath the surface of daily life. In a densely packed city where different cultures and beliefs collide daily, even entertainment becomes a battleground for larger conflicts. Some whisper that the talk has turned against Emperor Justinian himself. The scholar reminds his assistant that rumors pass from hand to hand like coins, but their value is often questionable. Still, he makes a mental note. If other sources confirm these disturbances, they'll need to take them seriously. Political unrest has toppled emperors before. After Theodorus withdraws, the dispatches demand attention. Reports from provincial governors paint pictures of life across the empire's far-flung territories. Diplomatic communications reveal the delicate dance of international relations. Intelligence reports track movements in the Western territories, now controlled by Germanic rulers, since the Western Roman Empire's official fall in 476 AD. The Eastern Empire, his empire, continues to thrive. It still calls itself Roman, though Greek language and culture increasingly define its character. This creates a fascinating paradox. An empire that lives in the space between past and present, between Latin tradition and Greek reality. One dispatch particularly captures his interest. From Alexandria comes news of ancient texts discovered in a private collection. Philosophical works thought lost during fires that damaged the famous library centuries earlier. The governor seeks guidance about sending these treasures to Constantinople's imperial library. The scholar notes his recommendation for acquisition. Though the empire is now Christian, Emperor Justinian values knowledge from all sources. The preservation of classical learning remains a priority, especially for those who serve as bridges between the pagan past and Christian present. This is the delicate balance of their age, honoring tradition while embracing transformation. Such discoveries remind him why he chose scholarly life over other pursuits. Each recovered text is a voice from the past, speaking across centuries to anyone willing to listen. In Alexandria's dry climate, papyrus and parchment can survive for generations, waiting in forgotten corners for rediscovery. These rescued works will join Constantinople's growing collection, adding to humanity's preserved wisdom. The morning grows older, and soon he must meet with Tribune Belisarius, recently returned from the frontier with reports that promise to be interesting. Military men and scholars often see the same events through different lenses, but both perspectives prove valuable when advising an emperor whose decisions affect millions. Before that meeting, there's time for a brief visit to his private chapel. Even scholars need moments of quiet reflection, especially when working on projects that will outlast their creators. The legal code they're crafting won't just organize existing laws, it will influence legal thinking for centuries to come. Such responsibility weighs heavily on careful minds. Picture yourself walking through the corridors of power in 6th century Constantinople, where every conversation could reshape the world. The morning air carries whispers of change, and somewhere in the imperial palace, a legal scholar prepares for prayers before the day's momentous discussions begin. The Eastern Christians had their own way of making the sign of the cross, moving from right to left, the opposite of their Western cousins. This simple gesture spoke volumes about how the empire had split, not just politically, but in the most intimate details of daily life. When you watched someone cross themselves, you could tell immediately which half of the old Roman world they belonged to. Icons stared down from chapel walls with those impossibly large eyes, painted flat against golden backgrounds that seemed to glow with their own inner light. These weren't the realistic sculptures that once filled Roman temples, but something entirely new, a fusion of Christian faith and Eastern artistic tradition. The gold leaf caught every flicker of candlelight, creating an atmosphere that felt more like stepping into another dimension than simply entering a room for prayer. Christianity in the Eastern Empire had become something the original apostles might not have recognized. Educated Greeks took the new faith and blended it with centuries of philosophical tradition, creating a unique mixture that borrowed from Plato as much as from Palestine. It was neither purely Christian nor purely pagan, but something altogether more complex, shaped by minds that refused to abandon their classical heritage even as they embraced a revolutionary new religion. Meanwhile, in the streets below the palace, trouble was brewing between the blues and the greens. These weren't just sports teams, they were political factions that could shake the foundations of the empire when they put aside their usual rivalry. Constantinople's chariot racing had evolved into something far more dangerous than entertainment. It had become the stage for urban politics, and when both sides agreed on something, emperors took notice. The tax policies that had united these traditional enemies represented more than just fiscal adjustments. They touched on fundamental questions about how an empire should fund its ambitions and whether the people of Constantinople were willing to pay for dreams of reconquest that seemed impossibly grand to most observers. Belisarius stood out among Justinian's generals, not just for his military skill, but for his understanding that winning battles was only the beginning of conquest. At 30, he had already grasped something that eluded many veteran commanders, that Rome's greatest strength had never been its legions alone, but its ability to transform conquered territories into functioning parts of a greater whole. The dream of reconquest seemed almost fantastical when spoken aloud. The Western territories had been under Germanic rule for generations now, long enough that entire populations had grown up knowing no other system. Italy, the very heart of what Rome once meant, was governed by Ostrogothic kings who had their own ideas about law and administration. North Africa, which had once fed the empire's capital cities, now served Vandal masters who had carved out their own kingdom from Roman ruins. Yet Belisarius saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. His vision extended beyond military campaigns to the harder work of rebuilding Roman governance, in lands that had adapted to very different ways of life. This wasn't just about planting eagles on distant battlefields. It was about recreating an entire civilization in territories that had moved on from Roman rule. The legal codex being compiled in Constantinople represented more than academic scholarship. It was the blueprint for this impossible dream. Every carefully translated law, every clarified statute, every resolved contradiction between ancient and modern practice was laying the groundwork for a future where Roman law might once again govern from Britain to Egypt. Theodora's support for these plans carried weight that went far beyond her official position. Her rise from the hippodrome to the throne represented one of history's most remarkable transformations. Born into the world of circus performers and theatrical entertainment, professions that polite society looked down upon, she had somehow become the most powerful woman in the known world. Her intelligence was legendary, matching her beauty in the stories that spread throughout the empire. But more than intelligence, she possessed a fierce determination that complemented Justinian's own ambitions. When empress and emperor agreed on a course of action, the combined force of their will could move mountains, or at least armies. The conversation between scholar and general on that spring morning touched on something deeper than military strategy or legal theory. It revealed the fundamental questions facing an empire that was no longer quite Roman in the old sense, yet refused to abandon its Roman identity. What did it mean to be Roman when most of your subjects spoke Greek, when your culture had evolved beyond recognition from the days of Caesar and Augustus? These philosophical concerns weren't mere academic curiosities. They had practical implications for every aspect of governance. If you were going to reconquer the West, you had to decide what exactly you were bringing to those territories. Was it the restoration of an old order, or the imposition of something entirely new that simply carried an ancient name? The scribes copying legal manuscripts in the palace workshops were participating in something far grander than clerical work. Each word they transcribed was part of an effort to define what Roman civilization meant in an age when Rome itself was no longer the center of the Roman world. Their careful copying preserved not just laws, but the very concept of legal continuity that stretched back centuries. Evening brought no rest from these weighty considerations. The implications of potential reconquest would ripple through every aspect of life in the Eastern Empire. Success would bring glory and territorial expansion, but also the enormous challenge of governing populations that had grown accustomed to different laws, different customs, different ways of understanding their place in the world. The palace corridors that night echoed with footsteps of those carrying the weight of imperial dreams, knowing that the decisions made in these chambers would determine whether the Roman Empire truly could rise again. or whether its eastern remnant would finally acknowledge that some things, once lost, cannot be recovered. The evening air in Constantinople carries something magical, a mixture of salt from the nearby sea, smoke drifting up from countless cooking fires, and the sweet fragrance of gardens tucked away behind palace walls. This is a city caught between day and night, between ancient and modern, between dreams of what was and visions of what might be. From the high terraces overlooking the sprawling metropolis, you can watch as the great city transforms itself with the setting sun. Wealthy households begin lighting their oil lamps, casting warm golden glows through shuttered windows. The bustling streets slowly empty as curfew approaches, that familiar rhythm of urban life that has repeated itself for centuries. Street vendors pack up their wares, their cheerful calls fading into memory, replaced by the steady footsteps and occasional shouts of night watchmen beginning their rounds. Below stretches the great hippodrome, where tomorrow will bring the thunderous excitement of chariot races. The blues and greens, those passionate racing factions that divide the city's loyalty, will fill the massive arena with their roaring enthusiasm. It's remarkable how something as simple as horses racing around a track can ignite such fierce devotion, such tribal passion, that sometimes spills into the streets themselves. Not far from the hippodrome stands the great public square, that ancient gathering place where imperial proclamations are read aloud to assembled crowds. Here, the voice of the emperor reaches his people, carrying news of wars, laws, celebrations, and sorrows. It's a tradition that connects this Christian empire to its pagan past, this ritual of ruler speaking directly to the ruled. Rising above it all, the magnificent dome of Hagia Sophia catches the last rays of sunlight. This church of holy wisdom represents something extraordinary, Justinian's architectural masterpiece, still taking shape after the previous church fell victim to earlier riots. There's something deeply symbolic about rebuilding something beautiful from the ashes of destruction, about creating lasting art in the wake of temporary violence. This city spread out below tells the story of an empire that defies simple categorization. Its legal system, its administrative structures, these remain thoroughly Roman, built on centuries of practical governance. Yet walk through its neighborhoods and you'll hear Greek spoken more than Latin, see Greek cultural expressions flourishing in theaters and schools. Christianity permeates everything, from the crosses adorning public buildings to the religious processions that wind through the streets on holy days. The very layout of Constantinople reflects this complex identity. Streets follow Roman engineering principles, straight and practical, leading to forums decorated with Greek statuary that celebrates ancient ideals of beauty and wisdom. Churches rise throughout the city, their interiors gleaming with distinctly Byzantine religious art, icons that blend classical techniques with Christian devotion. As complete darkness settles over the city, it transforms into something almost mystical. Countless points of light twinkle below, mirroring the star-filled sky above, creating the impression of living within a constellation, a bridge between earth and heaven. This moment invites reflection on one of history's most fascinating paradoxes. When Roman legions first clashed with Macedonian phalanxes at Cynocephalae in 197 BC, crushing Greek military power, who could have predicted the cultural revolution that would follow? Military conquest told only half the story, perhaps the less important half. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC saw Augustus finally defeat Mark Antony and Cleopatra, bringing the last remnants of Hellenistic independence under Roman control. Yet even as Rome's political dominance became absolute, something unexpected was happening. The conquered were conquering their conquerors, not through force of arms, but through the irresistible power of ideas, art, and learning. Greek culture began seeping into Roman life like water finding its way through stone. Roman aristocrats hired Greek tutors for their children. Greek philosophy shaped Roman thought. Greek architectural styles influenced Roman buildings. The Latin language itself borrowed countless Greek words, Greek concepts that had no Roman equivalent. History loves these ironies, these moments when the obvious outcome proves to be only the surface of a much deeper transformation. Rome conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. The Romans, who arrived as conquerors, gradually became the greatest preservers and transmitters of Greek learning. Greek subjects who lost their political independence found themselves with an empire-wide audience for their philosophy, literature, and artistic achievements. This cultural fusion created something entirely new, neither purely Roman nor purely Greek, but a synthesis that drew strength from both traditions. Greek intellectual curiosity, combined with Roman practical organization, Greek artistic sophistication, merged with Roman engineering skill. Greek philosophical depth enhanced Roman legal precision. Now, this remarkable Greco-Roman synthesis faces fresh challenges and unprecedented opportunities. The Western territories, those lands that once formed the heart of the old Roman Empire, have slipped away, conquered by Germanic tribes who rule according to their own customs and laws. Yet perhaps this loss need not be permanent. Perhaps what has been lost can be reclaimed. The old pagan religions that once dominated Mediterranean life have given way to Christianity, yet classical learning continues to flourish under Christian patronage. Monks copy ancient Greek and Roman text in monastery scriptoriums. Christian scholars study Aristotle and Plato alongside scripture. The wisdom of antiquity finds new life within the framework of Christian civilization. Latin, once the universal language of Roman administration, has retreated westward, while Greek has become the dominant tongue of the Eastern Empire. Yet Roman law remains foundational. Roman administrative systems continue to govern provinces and cities. The empire has changed its language while preserving its institutional memory. These thoughts weave together, like threads in an intricate tapestry, patterns of cultural evolution that have shaped the world in ways both obvious and subtle. The servant who approaches with respectful reminders of the late hour represents another thread in this tapestry. The ancient tradition of household service, of social hierarchies that persist even as empires transform themselves. The sleeping chamber awaits, comfortable but not ostentatious, reflecting the dignity of high imperial service without the dangerous extravagance that might seem for a man of learning. A feather mattress and silk coverings offer physical comfort, while shelves lined with books provide intellectual nourishment. These are codices rather than scrolls, representing the newer format that has largely replaced ancient methods of preserving texts. Even the way knowledge is stored and transmitted continues to evolve. An icon of Christ Pantocrator, Christ the All-Ruler, watches over the room from the eastern wall, while a small bust of Aristotle on its pedestal maintains connection to classical tradition. Here in miniature stands the synthesis that defines this empire, Christian faith and classical learning existing in harmony, rather than opposition. The evening rituals of preparation for sleep carry their own significance. Fresh water in basins, lamps burning low, beds turned down invitingly. These small ceremonies mark the transition from public responsibility to private reflection. The dismissal of servants with courteous thanks maintains social order while creating space for solitude. Removing formal robes, washing away the day's dust, these simple acts prepare both body and mind for rest. Yet even as the day's official duties end, thoughts return to great questions of policy and possibility. Belisarius's military proposals represent more than mere conquest. They offer the tantalizing possibility of reunifying the Mediterranean world under a single government. Such reunification would require far more than military victory. The administrative reconstruction that would follow would demand legal frameworks capable of governing territories that have developed their own systems under Germanic rule. The great legal codes being compiled in Constantinople would need to prove their worth in lands where Roman law has not been heard for generations. This represents the ultimate test of imperial identity. Can an empire that has evolved so dramatically still claim to be truly Roman? Can it reintegrate territories that have diverged culturally, linguistically, and politically after decades of separation? The challenge seems almost impossibly complex, yet the potential reward justifies the enormous effort required. A unified Mediterranean world governed by Roman law, enriched by Greek culture, and united by Christian faith would represent the culmination of centuries of historical development. It would prove that empires can evolve without losing their essential character, that synthesis need not mean weakness. As lamps are extinguished and bodies settle into soft mattresses, as breathing slows and minds transition from active thought to gentler pre-sleep contemplation, the night sky visible through windows offers its own quiet commentary. Stars suspended in darkness like distant lamps remind observers of their place in larger patterns, cosmic rhythms that dwarf human concerns, while somehow making them more meaningful rather than less. The city below sleeps, but never completely. Night watchmen continue their rounds. Bakers begin early morning preparations. The great wheel of urban life turns slowly through darkness toward dawn, carrying within its motion the accumulated weight of history and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. Picture Athens during its most magnificent days, when the marble gleamed white against azure skies and the greatest minds that ever lived walked through its streets. Socrates wandered these very pathways, asking questions that made people uncomfortable, questions that still echo today. His student Plato would later establish his academy here, where ideas about perfect societies and eternal truths took shape. Then came Aristotle, who tried to catalogue everything in the world, from politics to poetry, from logic to love. These weren't just abstract thinkers, lost in their theories. They were shaping the very foundations of how we understand knowledge, government, ethics, and beauty. Every time someone debates what makes a just society, or wonders about the nature of reality, or asks what makes a good life, they're walking in the footsteps of these ancient Greeks. But empires don't last forever, even golden ones. To the north, in the rough mountains of Macedonia, a different kind of power was growing. Philip of Macedon had something the refined Greeks lacked, a unified military machine that could move like a single organism across the battlefield. His son Alexander would take this war machine and use it to paint the map with Greek culture, stretching from Egypt to India. When Alexander's armies marched, they carried more than just spears and shields. They brought Greek language, Greek art, Greek ways of thinking about the world. Cities sprouted up in distant lands, each one a little Athens, complete with theatres and gymnasiums and schools, where local children learned to read Homer. This mixing of cultures, this blending of Greek ideas with local traditions, created something entirely new. The Greeks had always believed their way of life was superior, but now it was spreading, changing, adapting to new climates and customs. A Greek statue might appear in a Buddhist temple, or a Persian story might be told in Greek verse. The world was becoming more connected, more cosmopolitan, though the word itself wouldn't be invented for centuries. Then came Rome, with its disciplined legions and its hunger for order. The Romans looked at the chaotic Greek city-states and saw inefficiency, saw waste. They brought their eagles and their laws, their roads and their aqueducts. Greek political independence crumbled under the weight of Roman organization, but something fascinating happened in the process. The conquerors became the conquered, in a way. Roman generals started collecting Greek art. Roman nobles hired Greek tutors for their children. Roman poets tried to write like Greek masters. As one Roman writer put it, captive Greece took Rome captive. The Romans had the power, but the Greeks had the culture, and culture has a strange way of outlasting armies. This wasn't simple imitation, though. The Romans took Greek ideas and made them Roman, practical, useful for governing a vast empire. Greek philosophy became Roman law, Greek architecture became Roman engineering, Greek stories became Roman literature. Two civilizations were merging into something that was neither purely Greek nor purely Roman, but something new. Then came another transformation, one that would change everything again. A small religious movement from a distant province began to spread through the empire. Christianity started among the poor and the outcasts, but it carried within it ideas that would eventually reshape the entire Mediterranean world. The early Christians faced terrible persecution, but they had something powerful, a message of hope that spoke to people the old gods had forgotten. They built communities that crossed social boundaries. They cared for the sick and the poor. They offered eternal life to anyone who believed. Slowly, quietly, They were changing the empire from within. When Constantine finally made Christianity legal, and then favored, the transformation accelerated. Churches rose where temples had stood. Christian symbols replaced pagan ones, and the old stories gave way to new ones. But here's the remarkable thing. The Greek intellectual tradition didn't disappear, it adapted. Christian theologians used Greek philosophy to understand their faith. They wrote in Greek, they thought in Greek categories even as they worshipped a Jewish carpenter. The same logical methods that Aristotle had used to classify animals were now being used to understand the nature of God. Picture the Parthenon, that perfect temple that had watched over Athens for centuries. First, it housed the statue of Athena, goddess of wisdom, protector of the city. When the Romans came, it became a Roman temple. Same building, new purpose. Then the Christians arrived, and it became a church dedicated to the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ. The stones remained the same. The columns still supported the roof, but the meaning had transformed completely. People still came here to pray, to seek wisdom, to feel connected to something greater than themselves. But they prayed to different gods, told different stories, hoped for different futures. This is how civilizations really work, not through sudden breaks and violent endings, but through gradual transformation. Like a river that changes course so slowly, you hardly notice until you look back and see how far it's moved. The Roman Empire had absorbed Greece, but Greece had also absorbed Rome, and now Christianity was absorbing them both while being changed by them in return. By the time Constantinople rose as the new Rome, the synthesis was complete. Here was a city that was Roman in its government, Greek in its language and learning, Christian in its faith and symbols. The great cathedral of Hagia Sophia embodied this fusion, Roman engineering supporting a Greek concept of divine beauty in service of Christian worship. The people of this new empire called themselves Romans, spoke Greek, and prayed as Christians. Their lawyers studied Roman law while their priests quoted Greek philosophy, and their children learned Bible stories alongside classical mythology. They were living proof that conquest doesn't always mean replacement. Sometimes it means transformation. This wasn't just political convenience, it was cultural alchemy. Each tradition brought something essential to the mix. Rome contributed order, system, the ability to govern diverse peoples across vast distances. Greece brought intellectual curiosity, artistic beauty, the love of wisdom and learning. Christianity brought moral purpose, the promise of redemption, the idea that every human soul was precious. Together, these three streams created something that could weather storms that would have destroyed any one of them alone. When barbarian tribes pressed against the borders, Roman organization held the line. When that organization faltered, Greek learning preserved knowledge through dark centuries. When both failed, Christian faith provided hope and community that outlasted political collapse. The same stars that had watched over Pericles building the Parthenon now shone down on Justinian planning his great cathedral. The same Mediterranean winds that had filled the sails of Greek traders now carried the prayers of Christian pilgrims. The same human hopes for wisdom, beauty, justice, and meaning continued, expressed in new languages, served by new institutions, but fundamentally unchanged. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the meeting of Greece and Rome and Christianity, how it showed that the deepest human aspirations transcend any particular time or place. People in ancient Athens wanted good government, they wanted to understand the world, they wanted their lives to have meaning. People in imperial Rome wanted the same things. So did the early Christians. So do we. The forms change, the names change, the stories we tell ourselves change, but underneath flows the same eternal river of human longing. Conquest can destroy armies, can topple governments, can burn libraries, but it cannot touch this deeper current, and sometimes, when civilizations meet and merge, that current flows even stronger, carrying the best of each tradition forward into an uncertain but hopeful future.